What would happen if you were publicly insulted by someone in power, and you had to face them in court? Elon Musk stood in the courthouse, his face unreadable. The tall, imposing building surrounded him, a symbol of justice, power, and authority. But today, that power felt more like a cage. The court was buzzing with anticipation. News cameras flashed, reporters murmured, and the air was thick with tension. Musk had always been a figure of fascination to the world, a man who had reshaped industries, a visionary who saw the future before anyone else. But today, he wasn't standing in front of a board of directors or investors, he was standing before a judge. A judge who had already made up their mind about him. It was supposed to be a simple hearing. A legal matter related to one of his businesses, nothing more than a formality. But it had quickly escalated, turning into something personal. Something ugly. Musk wasn't sure how it had happened, but the moment he had stepped into the courtroom, the judge had made it clear they weren't a fan of him. The judge's eyes scanned him, and their lips curled into a smirk as they prepared to speak. "Mr. Musk," the judge began, their voice echoing through the courtroom. "You might be the richest man on the planet, but that doesn't mean you can buy your way out of this. You're no genius. Just another self-obsessed billionaire who doesn't care about the world, only about his own empire." The words hit Musk like a slap. For a split second, the room fell silent. His lawyers looked on, tense, while the reporters' cameras clicked furiously, capturing every moment. Everyone was waiting for Musk to react. They wanted to see if he'd lose his cool, if he'd fight back with the same venom the judge had just thrown at him. But Musk simply stood there, his face stoic, his gaze fixed on the judge. "Your Honor," Musk said calmly, his voice steady, "I don't know what you're trying to prove here, but this is a court of law, not a place for personal attacks. I'm here to resolve a legal matter, not to engage in petty insults." The judge's face hardened. "Petty? You're the one who thinks you can do whatever you want, without consequences. Your arrogance precedes you, Mr. Musk. You think you're above the law." The tension in the room was palpable. The audience was hanging on every word. Musk had always been able to handle pressure, but this was something different. He was used to being the one in control, to leading his companies through uncharted waters, making tough decisions. But in this courtroom, the power dynamic was reversed. The judge was the one in charge. Or so it seemed. Musk's eyes narrowed as he took a slow, deliberate breath. "Is this how you conduct all your hearings, Your Honor? By insulting the people who come before you?" His voice was measured, each word like a careful chess move, positioning himself for what was to come. The judge's face turned a shade darker. "I am not intimidated by your money, Musk. I know exactly who you are. You think you can just throw money at a problem and make it disappear. But not in my courtroom." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Some of the people in the audience exchanged glances, unsure of what was happening. Musk had always been a polarizing figure, admired by many for his revolutionary ideas, but hated by others who saw him as arrogant, detached, or even dangerous. But no one expected a public spat like this, especially not from a judge. In the back of the room, the cameras continued to roll, catching every second of the exchange. It was a spectacle now. A drama unfolding in real time, with Musk at the center of it. But Elon was no stranger to being the center of attention. What surprised him, however, was how personal the judge's attacks were becoming. This wasn't about the case anymore, it was about something deeper. The judge didn't like him, and they weren't even trying to hide it. For a moment, Musk considered responding in kind. He could easily tear into the judge, expose their biases, and turn the courtroom into chaos. But that wouldn't solve anything. It would only make him look as petty as the person sitting on the bench. Instead, he took a different approach. He would wait. He would play the long game. "Your Honor," Musk said, his voice cool and composed, "I came here to resolve this issue, not to waste time on insults. Let's focus on the facts. You have a job to do, and I have a business to run. Let's get back to that. The judge slammed their gavel down, clearly frustrated by Musk's calm response. Enough, Mr. Musk. You think you're untouchable, but I can assure you, you're not. And don't think for a second I'm going to let your wealth and influence make me bend. Musk nodded slowly, but inside, something shifted. This wasn't just a simple courtroom drama. This was a battle of wills. And it was far from over. As the judge continued to ramble, Musk allowed his mind to wander. He had been in high-pressure situations before, boardroom battles, media scrutiny, and even literal rocket launches. But this was different. There was something personal about this. The judge had just crossed a line, and it was clear they had no idea who they were dealing with. What they didn't know was that Musk had never been the type to back down. He didn't just have the resources to fight, he had the drive to win. And this courtroom? It was going to be a battleground. One way or another, the judge was going to regret insulting him in front of the world. The moment stretched on, the tension palpable. Musk could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, waiting for his next move. The judge had made a mistake, and they didn't even realize it. It wasn't just about the insult anymore. It was about who had the power to control the situation. For Musk, the game had just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk didn't become a billionaire overnight. It wasn't just a matter of luck or being born into the right family. It was a journey of relentless ambition, failure, and success, an unyielding desire to push the boundaries of what was possible, and a stubborn belief that the future could be shaped, no matter the odds. But those who saw only the headlines, the SpaceX launches, the Tesla innovations, the billions amassed, didn't see the sleepless nights or the internal battles that came with it. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon was the son of an electromechanical engineer and a model-turned-nutritionist. His father, Elon Musk, was a complex man, brilliant but cold, distant yet full of sharp opinions that shaped Elon's worldview. Elon's relationship with his father was fraught with tension. His mother, May Musk, on the other hand, was a constant source of love and encouragement. She taught Elon the value of education and perseverance, always pushing him to explore new ideas and to be curious about the world. Elon's passion for technology began early. He devoured books on science, physics, and engineering, showing an early aptitude for mathematics. But his real love was computers. At age 12, Elon taught himself how to program and sold a game called Blaster to a computer magazine for $500. It was a small victory, but it marked the beginning of a lifelong pursuit of innovation. Growing up, he wasn't the typical kid next door. He was often seen as different. His intellect set him apart from his peers, and not always in a way that made him popular. He was bullied in school, often the target of cruel jokes and physical taunts. But he never let it deter him. If anything, it fueled his drive to prove himself, to show the world that he wasn't just another kid with dreams, but someone who could change the world. His path to success was paved with failures, however. After high school, he left South Africa to attend Queen's University in Canada, before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the U.S. Despite his brilliance, Elon often struggled to fit in. He had big ideas, but the world didn't always seem ready for them. His first attempt at a business venture, Zip2, was a software company designed to help newspapers go digital. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a stepping stone that eventually sold for nearly $300 million. But for Musk, selling Zip2 wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. With his new fortune, he launched X.com, which would eventually become PayPal, revolutionizing the way people made payments online. After PayPal's sale to eBay for $1.5 billion, Elon's world began to change. With the money in his pocket and the world at his feet, he set his sights on something much bigger, something that would alter the course of humanity itself: space exploration. The rise of SpaceX and Tesla was marked by visionary thinking, but it was also an emotional roller coaster. SpaceX, in particular, was a gamble, a risk that most people thought would fail. In the early days, rockets exploded, and Musk faced near bankruptcy, with his own team questioning whether the whole venture was a waste of time and money. But Elon, as always, remained determined. SpaceX eventually succeeded, launching rockets into orbit and changing the entire space industry. Tesla, meanwhile, was equally challenging. Many believed that electric cars would never work, that they were too impractical, too expensive, and that consumers wouldn't buy them. But Elon, armed with a vision of a sustainable future, pushed forward. He bet his fortune and his future on it, pouring all his resources into making electric cars a mainstream reality. Through all the success, however, Musk had paid a personal price. His relationships were often strained. He had been married 3 times, twice to actress Tallulah Riley, and once to Justine Musk, with whom he shares 5 children. His work consumed him, and the emotional toll it took on his personal life was immense. He often worked 100-hour weeks, leaving little time for family or friends. He wasn't always the easiest person to be around, and many of his closest relationships had frayed under the pressure of his ambition. Despite the personal cost, Musk remained laser-focused on his mission. He wasn't driven by money. He was driven by the belief that humanity's future lay in the stars, in sustainable energy, in the unknown. But that vision came at a price. As Elon stood in the courtroom today, he wasn't just a billionaire. He wasn't just a man facing a legal issue. He was a man who had fought tooth and nail for every inch of progress. A man who had been told countless times that his ideas were too far-fetched, too unrealistic, and that he was chasing the impossible. But Elon Musk was no stranger to impossible odds. What most people didn't know, however, was that behind the calculated exterior, Elon had his own doubts. The constant pressure, the unrelenting expectations, and the unspoken fear that everything could come crashing down at any moment weighed heavily on him. The world may have seen him as a visionary, but there were moments when Elon wondered if he was truly the right person to lead these extraordinary ventures. Today, however, in this courtroom, in front of this judge, those doubts didn't matter. This was a test of his character. A test of his resilience. And Musk wasn't about to back down. The judge's insults hadn't shaken him, not in the way the world might have expected. Musk wasn't reacting to the provocation. He was planning, carefully calculating his next move. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about winning the case. It was about something more important, proving that no one, no matter how powerful, could undermine his resolve. Not today. As the judge continued to ramble, Musk's thoughts shifted to the bigger picture. He had faced bigger challenges than this. He had seen rockets explode, factories burn, and his dreams teeter on the brink of collapse. But each time, he had come out stronger. And he would do the same now. The world may have thought that the judge had the upper hand in this courtroom. But Musk had a secret weapon, his ability to think ahead, to outsmart and outmaneuver. And in this battle, he wasn't going to just survive. He was going to win. The courtroom buzzed with unease. Musk could feel the weight of the judge's scorn, and it was growing heavier with every word. The judge seemed to have no intention of backing down, relishing in the opportunity to undermine him. Musk had seen many battles, public relations crises, legal entanglements, financial scrutiny, but this was something else. It wasn't just about the case at hand anymore. This was personal. This judge had made it clear, they despised him. "I can't even imagine," the judge sneered, tapping their gavel with a force that echoed in the tense silence of the courtroom, "how a man like you sleeps at night. How do you look yourself in the mirror after all the damage you've caused to society? You've profited from environmental destruction, from the exploitation of labor in your factories, from technology that divides, rather than unites." The judge's words cut through the air like a blade. The audience was riveted. Some reporters were already tweeting live updates, others whispered among themselves. The drama was unfolding in front of their eyes. Musk's gaze remained unwavering, his expression calm. It had become clear that this wasn't about the legal issue at all. This was a personal vendetta, a judge using their power to attack a figure they saw as emblematic of everything wrong with modern capitalism. Musk had been insulted plenty of times before, on social media, in the press, even by close friends who disagreed with his methods. But there was something different about this. The stakes were higher. The eyes of the world were on him, waiting for him to react. Elon's lawyers sat at their table, visibly uncomfortable, glancing at one another as the judge's tirade continued. One of them leaned toward Musk, speaking in a low voice, "We need to say something. We can't just sit here and let this go." But Musk shook his head. His mind was elsewhere. He didn't need to react right now. His strategy was clear. Every insult the judge hurled was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Musk wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to outsmart them. The judge continued, growing bolder with each passing second. "You think you're some sort of hero, some champion of the future. But the truth is, Mr. Musk, you're just a rich man with too much power and too little humility. You are no savior. You're just another billionaire who exploits the system for personal gain." The courtroom fell into a hushed silence. Musk could feel his blood begin to boil, but he kept his composure. He wasn't going to fall for the bait. He wasn't going to lose his cool. He sat back in his chair, his fingers lightly drumming on the armrest. Inside, his thoughts were calculating. He had been insulted and belittled before by much more formidable opponents. This was just another challenge, a test of patience, of restraint. The judge wanted to provoke him into making a mistake, to slip up, to lose control. But Musk wasn't interested in responding in kind. His approach had always been to think ahead, to work smarter, not harder. The room was watching, waiting for his next move. The judge had overplayed their hand, and Musk knew it. The more they insulted him, the more they exposed their bias. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the integrity of the court itself. If he didn't push back now, it would be a victory for arrogance, for abuse of power. No one, no matter how powerful, should be allowed to bully someone in a position of vulnerability. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Musk stood. His movements were deliberate, calm, and purposeful. The judge looked at him, clearly expecting him to respond with anger, to shout back and cause a scene. But instead, Musk spoke in a low, measured tone that carried weight in the stillness of the courtroom. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady, "you've made your opinion about me very clear. But let's get one thing straight. This isn't about me. This is about something much more important, the integrity of this court and the principle of justice. You've spent the last several minutes attacking my character, questioning my worth, my intentions, and my motivations. But what you've failed to realize is that your personal feelings toward me don't matter here." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. The courtroom was hanging on his every syllable. The reporters had gone quiet, their cameras poised but still. Musk knew this was his moment to turn the tide. "You are not the judge of my worth, Your Honor. You are the judge of this case. And if you cannot separate your personal biases from your professional duties, then you are no longer fit to preside over this court." The room went dead silent. The judge's face twitched, a brief flicker of disbelief crossing their features. Musk continued, unwavering. "Perhaps you feel threatened by someone like me, someone who has accomplished things you might never have believed possible. But that doesn't give you the right to use your position of power to make baseless attacks. Your behavior here is an abuse of the very system you are sworn to uphold." For a moment, the judge stared at him, their face a mixture of shock and fury. But Musk didn't flinch. He knew that the game was shifting, that the judge had just been backed into a corner. The judge's earlier insults had set the stage for this very moment. Now it was time for Musk to expose the truth. "Make no mistake, Your Honor," Musk said, locking eyes with the judge, "you've crossed a line. You've made this personal, and I will not stand for it. The world is watching. At those words, a shift occurred in the room. The judge's anger flared, but the uncertainty was palpable. Musk had just changed the narrative, and the balance of power had shifted. Musk wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was making a stand for something larger: justice, fairness, and accountability. And in that moment, the audience could feel the tension building. The judge wasn't the one in control anymore. The next words out of the judge's mouth were cold, dripping with authority, but there was a hint of nervousness beneath the surface. "Mr. Musk, if you continue with these accusations, I will have you held in contempt of court." Musk smiled, a slow, knowing grin. This wasn't the end. It was only just beginning. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Everyone could feel it, the shift in the air when Musk stood up and calmly but assertively declared his stance. The judge, once brimming with contempt, was now visibly rattled. For a moment, they hesitated. It was as if the room collectively held its breath, waiting for the next step in this unfolding drama. Musk's calm, composed demeanor was unnerving. He wasn't like most of the billionaires who would hide behind their lawyers or brush off the insults. He was different. He stood alone, ready to face the fight head-on. The courtroom, which had once been a place where the judge held absolute authority, was now divided. The jury members exchanged looks, unsure of what to believe. Was Musk right? Was the judge overstepping their bounds? The legal experts watching the live broadcast began to weigh in with mixed opinions. The judge, clearly taken aback, slammed the gavel with force, attempting to reassert control. "Mr. Musk," they said, their voice clipped with rising irritation, "I will not tolerate this insubordination. You're here to address the matter at hand, not engage in personal attacks." But Musk wasn't finished. His eyes locked onto the judge's, unwavering, confident. "And you are here to administer justice, Your Honor. Not to indulge your personal vendettas," he countered, his words like an arrow that struck its mark. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if the judge was ready to fight back, but then their gaze shifted. The courtroom was too tense. Too many people were watching. The judge realized, perhaps for the first time, that this wasn't just another high-profile case. This was a test of their own credibility. Musk had flipped the narrative. He wasn't just defending his character, he was now accusing the judge of a serious ethical breach. The room grew quieter, the weight of what Musk had said settling in. For a man who had made a career of challenging the status quo, this was yet another confrontation he was prepared to win. Musk's voice remained calm, though it carried an undeniable edge. "If you truly believe that your role is to decide who is worthy of respect in this courtroom, then I think it's time to revisit the purpose of justice," Musk continued. "I've always believed that the law is meant to protect the innocent and punish those who break it. But if the very people entrusted with upholding the law, judges, are allowed to let personal animus cloud their judgment, then we've lost something far more important." There was a shift in the audience. Musk wasn't just defending himself anymore, he was challenging the system. He had gone beyond the personal insults thrown at him and was now questioning the integrity of the very court itself. The room was full of stunned silence as the weight of his words took hold. The judge, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to reassert control, but their voice now wavered. "Enough, Mr. Musk. You are in contempt of court. I warn you one more time." Before the judge could finish, Musk raised his hand, signaling for silence. "Your Honor, you can throw me in contempt all you want, but the truth remains," he said, his words measured and deliberate. "You've crossed a line that can't be undone." A hushed murmur spread through the room. Musk's presence had completely altered the trajectory of the hearing. But Musk had something far more important in mind than just making the judge back down. His words, so carefully chosen, had one purpose: to put the judge's actions under the microscope. He wanted to make it clear that this wasn't just a case about him, this was about the fairness of the legal system itself. As Musk spoke, his legal team sprang into action. The lead attorney, a sharp and experienced lawyer named Laura Fields, stood up and addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, we request a formal review of your conduct in this case. If these personal insults continue, we will have no choice but to escalate this matter to a higher court. The judge's eyes narrowed. You think you can threaten me, Miss Fields? They snapped. But Laura was unfazed. It's not a threat, Your Honor. It's a request for fairness and impartiality in your courtroom. The judge's face reddened as their frustration grew. This is my courtroom, they spat, clearly losing their composure. And I will not be intimidated by you or your client. Musk stepped forward, taking his moment. You're not being intimidated, Your Honor. You're being held accountable, he said, his voice sharp but controlled. And I think it's time for someone to explain the concept of justice to you. The entire room fell silent. It was as if time stood still. Musk wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He had positioned himself as a champion of justice, not just for his case but for everyone who had ever been subjected to unfair treatment in the courts. His words had resonated deeply with everyone present. And then, the unexpected happened. A uniformed officer stepped into the courtroom, walking up to the bench. The judge, still trying to regain control of the room, barely noticed the officer at first. But when the officer cleared their throat, the judge's head snapped up. What is this? The judge demanded. The officer was holding a piece of paper. They handed it to the judge, who began reading it aloud, their eyes widening with shock. It's a formal motion from the court's oversight committee, the officer said, requesting your immediate suspension due to a conflict of interest and abuse of power. The room erupted in chaos. The judge, taken completely by surprise, stood frozen. This was something Musk hadn't expected, but something he had planned for. The official motion was the result of a series of complaints that had been filed against the judge in recent months, all of them regarding accusations of bias and misconduct. Musk's comments, while personal, had opened the floodgates. Musk's legal team had quietly been gathering evidence for weeks, working with watchdog organizations, and compiling complaints about the judge's behavior. The insults, the unchecked anger, the clear bias, it had all been documented. Musk's calculated response to the judge's personal attacks was not just about winning a case. It was about taking down someone who had used their position of power to undermine the very principles of justice. The judge's face paled as they realized what was happening. This is an outrage, the judge yelled, trying to maintain their authority. You can't do this. But the officer was firm. The motion has been filed. You are hereby removed from presiding over this case, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted into a mixture of shock and applause. Some gasped in disbelief, while others openly cheered. Musk's strategy had worked. He had turned the tables in a way no one could have predicted. The judge was escorted from the bench, their gavel now silent, their power now gone. Musk stood tall, his face a mask of calm determination. He wasn't just the victor here, he had exposed the truth. The system, for all its flaws, still had a way of correcting itself. Musk turned to his legal team, nodding once, a subtle acknowledgement of the victory they had achieved together. But he knew this was just one battle. The war, as always, was far from over. As the judge was escorted from the courtroom, the weight of the moment lingered in the air, thick with disbelief. The audience was still buzzing from the unexpected turn of events. It was a rare sight, courtrooms weren't places where power dynamics shifted so dramatically. But that was the essence of Elon Musk, never conventional, never predictable. His approach, calculated and precise, had done what seemed impossible. The judge had been removed, and Musk stood there, victorious. The courtroom was in chaos, but Musk was calm. His face remained a mask of composure, though his mind was racing. This was more than just about winning this one legal skirmish. It was about proving a point, something far deeper than the case at hand. Musk's desire to show that even those who wield immense power could be held accountable had resonated deeply, not only with the public but also with the media. This battle was no longer confined to the walls of this courtroom. The world was watching, and Musk had just made an indelible statement. But as Musk stood there, his team filing motions and the officers removing the disgraced judge from the bench, something unexpected happened. The courtroom's door opened with a quiet creak, and a figure stepped in, causing the entire room to freeze. A new judge. But this wasn't just any judge. This was someone who had made waves in the legal community for their unflinching stance on fairness, their reputation for integrity, and their history of making tough but fair decisions. It was Judge Rebecca Hale, a name that carried weight. Musk had done his homework. He knew what he was up against. Judge Hale was known for having no patience for drama, no tolerance for egos. If she was stepping in, it meant one thing: the case was about to take a dramatic shift. "Mr. Musk," Judge Hale said, her voice low and calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "It seems we have a new chapter to this already rather eventful trial." Musk met her gaze without hesitation. There was no intimidation here, only respect. Judge Hale's reputation wasn't just about her ability to make tough calls, it was about how she handled chaos. This case had taken a turn no one had predicted, and it was about to take yet another unexpected direction. The room was still on edge, but Hale's presence calmed the tension, if only for a moment. She motioned for the attorneys and Musk to return to their seats, signaling the continuation of the trial. There was no time to dwell on the drama that had just unfolded. The trial was still ongoing, and it was clear that the outcome of the next few hours would determine the fate of more than just Musk's legal standing. Musk sat down at the table, his face reflecting a sense of quiet determination. The dramatic removal of the previous judge had been a win, but now he had a new battle to face. Judge Hale was no pushover. In fact, she had a reputation for dismantling arrogance and ensuring that the law was applied without bias. Musk knew this was the next stage of the game, and he was ready. Judge Hale didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm aware of the history of this case, and I've reviewed the filings. But I'm here to ensure that justice prevails, Mr. Musk. I expect your legal team to maintain professionalism moving forward, and I expect the same from all parties involved." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Judge Hale had come in like a calm storm, and Musk could sense that she was not interested in any distractions. This wasn't about personalities. It was about the case. The law. And Musk's strategy would need to adjust accordingly. As the trial continued, Musk focused. His earlier emotional battle was now over. The insults, the personal attacks, the courtroom chaos, it had all been a test. He had passed it with flying colors. But now, with Judge Hale at the helm, there was no room for missteps. The stakes had only risen. The tension was still high, but there was an undeniable shift. The court, once filled with the fire and fury of personal vendettas, now seemed to be returning to its intended purpose, to seek the truth. The new judge was not interested in making headlines or giving way to emotional confrontations. Judge Hale was all about what the law said, and that was what Musk needed. But just when it seemed like the case might return to its normal rhythm, a startling development occurred. A new piece of evidence was introduced, something Musk had not anticipated. A report from an independent agency, something his team had been unaware of until now, that cast a shadow over his actions in the case. It was a document that raised questions about some of the contracts Musk had signed, contracts that, if examined too closely, could suggest a pattern of ethically questionable decisions. The report contained a highly damaging allegation, that Musk had been involved in making key business decisions that directly benefited his personal interests over the company's stated goals. The revelation hit like a bombshell. For a moment, the entire room froze. Musk's face didn't betray any emotion. He'd always been ready for the unexpected. But this? This was different. Musk's legal team sprang into action. Laura Fields, the sharp lead attorney, was already reviewing the report with a furrowed brow. She didn't panic. She'd seen much worse, but this was serious. "Elon," she whispered urgently, "this wasn't part of the plan. We need to address this immediately." Musk took a deep breath. He could feel the eyes of the world on him once more. But he wouldn't flinch. He knew that his ability to adapt was one of his greatest strengths. Whatever this new evidence was, it would have to be dealt with swiftly. Judge Hale observed the scene, her gaze never wavering. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "this is serious. If this report is true, it could alter the entire trajectory of this case. I expect a response, and I expect it now." Musk nodded, standing slowly. The courtroom was silent again. He was facing his most formidable opponent yet, the truth. He knew that his public persona, his reputation as a visionary and disruptor, had brought him to this point. But now, he had to prove that his actions matched the ideals he espoused. "Judge Hale," Musk began, his voice steady, "this report is misleading. It's an interpretation of data that's taken out of context, and it doesn't tell the full story. What it fails to mention is the bigger picture, the long-term goals that this company has been working toward. But I will address every point in it, and I will prove, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that what has been said here is not accurate." The courtroom held its breath. Musk had faced adversity before, crises that would have shattered lesser individuals, but this was something different. The evidence was potentially devastating. Yet, Musk's demeanor remained unwavering, his focus sharper than ever. And in that moment, something shifted again. Musk wasn't just trying to defend himself or his business. He was trying to defend his entire philosophy, the principles that had driven him to push the boundaries of technology and innovation. This case, with its twists and turns, had become more than just a legal battle. It was a battle for his legacy. As the room waited for his next move, the stakes had never been higher. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation as Musk prepared to address the evidence that had threatened to unravel everything. The report, the one that had been presented just moments ago, loomed over him like a dark cloud. It was designed to weaken his position, to paint him in a light that would suggest corruption or personal gain at the expense of his company and employees. The allegations were serious, the stakes high, and the eyes of the world were watching his every move. Musk, however, was not the type to shy away from a challenge. He stood tall at the defense table, his expression calm but resolute. His legal team, led by Laura Fields, had already begun to dissect the report and prepare a counterargument, but Musk knew that this wasn't just about presenting facts. This was a battle for his reputation, one that could shape the rest of his career. "Judge Hale," Musk began, his voice steady and commanding, "the report you've just seen represents a distortion of facts. It takes a few isolated incidents and stretches them out of context to create a narrative that simply isn't true." Judge Hale, still seated at the bench, watched him closely. "Mr. Musk, I expect a direct response to the allegations. Do you or do you not have a pattern of making business decisions that benefit your personal interests over your company's goals?" Musk's eyes narrowed as he prepared to respond. He had anticipated this moment. He had seen reports like this before. And, more importantly, he knew how to handle it. "Let me be clear," he said, stepping forward slightly, addressing both the judge and the jury, "the decisions I've made, the investments I've personally backed, and the ventures I've pursued, every single one of those decisions was made with one goal in mind, the future of humanity." The courtroom was silent as Musk spoke. His words were firm, each syllable intentional. "We are on the precipice of incredible technological advancements. Everything I've done has been in pursuit of this vision. Yes, I've invested my own money, and yes, I've taken risks that others wouldn't dare to take. But every cent, every decision, every step I've made was for the betterment of the future." There was a slight pause as Musk let his words settle. "The idea that I've personally benefited at the expense of my companies or my teams is not only inaccurate, it is an insult to the very people I work with every day. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, they are not my companies. They belong to the brilliant engineers, scientists, and innovators who drive them forward. My role is to help guide them, not control them for my own gain." Laura Field stood up beside him, glancing at the report that had been handed to Judge Hale. She knew what Musk was saying was true, but it was one thing to say it, it was another thing to prove it. Your Honor, she began, we would like to submit a comprehensive list of investments, business decisions, and employee contributions that directly counter the allegations in this report. These documents will clearly demonstrate that all the decisions made by Mr. Musk were in line with his public commitment to advancing technology for the greater good. Judge Hale nodded, signaling that she was listening closely. Very well. I'll allow it, she said, turning her attention to the defense team. Musk felt the slightest shift of weight in his chest. It wasn't victory yet, but it was a start. The battle was far from over, but at least now, the facts were on his side. Laura Fields moved quickly, handing over a stack of documents to the judge, each one carefully outlined to provide clarity on Musk's business decisions. It was a meticulous effort, and for a moment, it seemed like the tide of the case might turn. Musk returned to his seat, his gaze unwavering. He was exhausted, but his focus remained laser-sharp. He could feel the weight of the courtroom's eyes upon him, and it was clear that he had turned the narrative back in his favor. But there was something deeper, something personal, that was fueling his resolve. For years, Musk had been a lightning rod for controversy. His boldness, his vision, and his unorthodox approach to business had earned him both admiration and scorn. But this case, this moment, was different. It wasn't just about defending his companies or his reputation, it was about defending his very identity. Musk had always been an outsider, someone who didn't play by the rules. And that, in many ways, was the source of his strength. But it also made him vulnerable. The courtroom had been a reflection of everything Musk had ever faced in the public eye, a constant battle to prove that his unconventional methods, his willingness to challenge the status quo, were not just justified but necessary for progress. As the judge reviewed the documents, the courtroom remained tense. The defense team had done their job, but it was still unclear whether it would be enough to counter the report's damaging allegations. The next few moments felt like an eternity, and Musk's thoughts raced. The public perception of him, his companies, and his vision could all hang in the balance. Finally, Judge Hale placed the documents down. I've reviewed the evidence, she said, her voice calm but firm. While I acknowledge the points made by the defense, I also understand the importance of transparency in business practices. I expect a full investigation into these matters, and I will hold you, Mr. Musk, accountable if further evidence emerges that suggests any wrongdoing. Musk nodded, his expression unchanged. I welcome any investigation, Your Honor, he said evenly. I have nothing to hide. With that, Judge Hale turned her attention to the jury. Members of the jury, she began, I trust you will consider all the facts presented here today. It is your responsibility to determine whether or not the accusations leveled against Mr. Musk are substantiated. The room fell into an even deeper silence as the jury began their deliberation. Musk's legal team gathered around him, quietly discussing the next steps, but Musk wasn't focused on that. He was lost in thought, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. The case had become something far greater than a legal battle. It had become a test of character, of resilience, and of the very principles that had driven him to create some of the most innovative companies in the world. He had been challenged, insulted, and questioned at every turn. But through it all, Musk had remained steadfast, determined to prove that his vision was not just about profit, it was about something much bigger. The future. He had learned, perhaps more than ever before, the true cost of being a visionary in a world that wasn't always ready to understand you. But the lesson was clear, his journey wasn't just about breaking through barriers, it was about creating a legacy that would stand the test of time. As the jury deliberated, Musk stood up, taking one last look around the courtroom. He knew that this was just another chapter in a much larger story. A story of perseverance, of relentless ambition, and, ultimately, of redemption. The battle had been fierce. But the war was far from over. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted again. The jury had been deliberating for hours, and the tension was palpable. Musk could feel it in his bones, the weight of every word, every argument, every decision. This wasn't just about the case anymore, this was about proving himself to the world. It was about showing everyone, including his fiercest critics, that he had nothing to hide. Judge Hale had done her part to keep the proceedings fair and unbiased. She was no fan of spectacle, and her measured approach had forced Musk to keep his focus on the facts. But in the end, he knew this wasn't just going to be a battle of legal minds. It was a battle of willpower, a test of who could outlast the other. The stakes were as high as they could get, and he wasn't going to back down. The courtroom doors creaked open, and all eyes turned toward the jury as they filed back into their seats. Musk's heart rate picked up slightly. It was an instinctive reaction, though he did his best to mask it. He was ready for whatever outcome awaited him. Judge Hale stood as the jury foreman approached, the heavy silence in the room almost deafening. She took the document in his hand, nodded once, and then sat back down, her expression unreadable. The jury had reached a verdict. "Mr. Musk," Judge Hale began, her voice steady, "the jury has reached a decision. We will now hear their verdict." Musk's gaze hardened as the jury foreman cleared his throat and stood to deliver the verdict. Every eye in the room was on him, the moment of truth finally arriving. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty of the charges of financial misconduct, insider trading, and ethical violations as outlined in the report." The words hung in the air, a moment of stunned silence following the pronouncement. Musk didn't allow himself to react immediately, but internally, he felt a surge of relief flood through him. It wasn't just the weight of the verdict, it was the validation. For months, his name had been dragged through the mud. But here, today, the truth had prevailed. There was a murmur in the courtroom. Some whispered in disbelief, others nodded in approval, but Musk didn't focus on them. He knew this was only part of the story. This victory was important, but it was the lessons learned along the way that would shape him going forward. Judge Hale turned her gaze to the gallery, her voice ringing out clearly. "This case has been a reminder of the importance of fairness in our legal system. I trust that the decision reached today will be respected by all parties involved. Court is adjourned." With those words, the gavel came down. The case was officially over. The courtroom emptied quickly, but Musk stayed in his seat for a few extra moments. His mind was still racing. This battle had been an emotional roller coaster, one that had pushed him to his limits. But there was something else, something deeper, that he had learned in the process. Even when the odds seemed insurmountable, even when the entire system was against him, the truth would always find a way to surface. As he made his way out of the courtroom, Musk felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had won, yes, but it wasn't the kind of victory that left you basking in glory. This one felt different. It was a vindication of everything he had worked for. The vision he had for the future was now clearer than ever before, and nothing could stand in his way. He stepped out into the brisk afternoon air, the sound of the courtroom doors closing behind him. A brief moment of quiet. But then, as if on cue, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, unlocking the screen to find a flood of notifications. News outlets were already covering the verdict. The social media posts were pouring in. Headlines were being written as he walked. The world was watching. He smiled wryly. This was the life he had chosen, the life of disruption, of challenge, of constant scrutiny. But in that moment, as he read through the messages of support and even some congratulatory remarks from his fiercest critics, he knew something profound. The trial was over, but his real work had only just begun. As Musk made his way to his car, his thoughts drifted back to where it all started. The courtroom drama, the legal battles, the stress, it all felt like a distant memory now. The future loomed large in his mind, an expansive field of possibilities stretching out before him. There would be no time to rest. The world didn't slow down, and neither could he. Yet, there was a profound sense of accomplishment. More than just winning a legal case, Musk had emerged from this experience with a renewed sense of clarity. He had always known that his mission was about more than just technology, it was about humanity's future, about leaving a legacy that would change the world. But he had learned something invaluable in the process, the importance of resilience. Throughout the trial, he had been forced to confront his own fears, doubts, and insecurities. It wasn't just a fight against the accusations, it was a battle for his identity, for the principles he believed in. And in the end, it was those principles that had won. As he got into his car and drove away from the courthouse, Musk felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The pressure was still there, always there, but now, it was easier to bear. The knowledge that he had weathered the storm and come out on top was a powerful reminder of his own strength. In a way, this trial had prepared him for the next chapter of his life. He had faced the worst of what the world could throw at him, and yet he had emerged unscathed. The future he had once envisioned now seemed within reach. He thought about the people who had supported him through it all, the engineers, the employees, the friends who had stood by him even when the world seemed to turn its back. This was for them. This was for the future they were building together. And in the back of his mind, one thought resonated louder than all the rest: there was still so much more to be done. Musk's journey had just begun. The sun was setting as Elon Musk stepped into his office at Tesla's headquarters. The day had been long, filled with a whirlwind of emotions, but the weight of the legal battle had finally lifted. The victory in court was still fresh, but Musk knew better than to celebrate for too long. His mind was already shifting forward, and the world was moving faster than ever. He sat down at his desk, where his computer screen flickered to life. A stack of reports, emails, and project updates lay in front of him, but none of them caught his attention. Instead, his thoughts wandered back to the trial. The unexpected accusations, the intense cross-examinations, the way Judge Hale had scrutinized his every word. It had been a trial by fire, but in many ways, it had strengthened his resolve. As Musk made his way to his car, his thoughts drifted back to where it all started. The courtroom drama, the legal battles, the stress, it all felt like a distant memory now. The future loomed large in his mind, an expansive field of possibilities stretching out before him. There would be no time to rest. The world didn't slow down, and neither could he. Yet, there was a profound sense of accomplishment. More than just winning a legal case, Musk had emerged from this experience with a renewed sense of clarity. He had always known that his mission was about more than just technology, it was about humanity's future, about leaving a legacy that would change the world. But he had learned something invaluable in the process: the importance of resilience. Throughout the trial, he had been forced to confront his own fears, doubts, and insecurities. It wasn't just a fight against the accusations, it was a battle for his identity, for the principles he believed in. And in the end, it was those principles that had won. As he got into his car and drove away from the courthouse, Musk felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The pressure was still there, always there, but now, it was easier to bear. The knowledge that he had weathered the storm and come out on top was a powerful reminder of his own strength. In a way, this trial had prepared him for the next chapter of his life. He had faced the worst of what the world could throw at him, and yet he had emerged unscathed. The future he had once envisioned now seemed within reach. He thought about the people who had supported him through it all, the engineers, the employees, the friends who had stood by him even when the world seemed to turn its back. This was for them. This was for the future they were building together. And in the back of his mind, one thought resonated louder than all the rest: there was still so much more to be done. Musk's journey had just begun. The sun was setting as Elon Musk stepped into his office at Tesla's headquarters. The day had been long, filled with a whirlwind of emotions, but the weight of the legal battle had finally lifted. The victory in court was still fresh, but Musk knew better than to celebrate for too long. His mind was already shifting forward, and the world was moving faster than ever. He sat down at his desk, where his computer screen flickered to life. A stack of reports, emails, and project updates lay in front of him, but none of them caught his attention. Instead, his thoughts wandered back to the trial. The unexpected accusations, the intense cross-examinations, the way Judge Hale had scrutinized his every word. It had been a trial by fire, but in many ways, it had strengthened his resolve. Musk had learned something crucial during those long months in the courtroom: resilience wasn't just about enduring. It was about evolving, adapting, and pushing through when it seemed like the world was against you. The courtroom was only a microcosm of the challenges he faced every day in the high-stakes world of business and technology. But the bigger challenge was always ahead, the one that required vision and, most importantly, action. He leaned back in his chair and thought about the next steps. The triumph in the courtroom had settled one issue, but the long-term battle was far from over. His companies, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, had all taken significant strides, but Musk knew that their true potential had yet to be realized. The world was changing, and the demand for innovation was growing. And with it, so was the pressure. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's the one big challenge you think the world is facing right now? Musk muttered aloud to himself, testing a line he'd used in various interviews and talks. The question seemed simple, but it resonated deeply within him. What was the world's greatest challenge? In his mind, it was clear: humanity needed to adapt. The future was going to be unpredictable. From space exploration to artificial intelligence, the world was on the brink of monumental changes. And Musk, as always, was determined to be at the forefront of that change. But with each new breakthrough, there came new risks. The court case had been an eye-opener, but Musk knew that many of the critics, both inside and outside his companies, would now be even more focused on his every move. Failure was not an option. The stakes had always been high, but now, they seemed higher than ever before. His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX. Her message was brief but pointed: "We need to talk. Big decision to make." Musk's mind shifted immediately into problem-solving mode. SpaceX had been at the forefront of private space exploration, and the stakes were even higher there. The company was in the midst of launching a new generation of rockets, and every step of the process was filled with challenges and uncertainties. But Musk thrived in uncertainty; he always had. His willingness to take risks, to fail fast and learn faster, had always been his greatest strength. He quickly replied, "I'll be there in 20." Musk entered the conference room at SpaceX's headquarters, where Gwynne Shotwell was already seated, papers and digital projections scattered across the table. The tension in the air was palpable, and Musk immediately sensed the gravity of the situation. "Gwynne, what's going on?" he asked, his voice low but focused. Shotwell looked up, her expression serious. "We've received a proposal from the government. They want to collaborate on a new Mars mission, but there's a catch. They want us to integrate with a larger consortium of companies. And they're offering a considerable sum in return." Musk's brow furrowed. "A consortium? You mean they want us to partner with other private companies for this mission?" "Yes," Shotwell confirmed. "It's not a bad deal in terms of funding, but the government is placing specific conditions on how the mission will be managed. It means giving up some control, which, as you know, is something we don't do easily." Musk stood still for a moment, considering the implications. Space exploration was something he had envisioned from the start. The mission to Mars was his passion, his vision, and his legacy. The idea of sharing that vision, of diluting it with the interests of other companies, was a difficult pill to swallow. But he knew that SpaceX had always been about more than just profit; it was about pushing the boundaries of what was possible. "The money would help us accelerate the mission," Shotwell continued, "but we have to consider what we're giving up. The consortium's rules might limit how we operate, especially with things like timelines, research, and autonomy. We'd be locked into a system where we no longer have complete control." Musk paced the room for a moment, his mind racing. He had always believed that the future was too important to be confined by bureaucratic red tape. But the reality was that space exploration was a massive endeavor, one that required resources and collaboration on an unprecedented scale. He turned back to Shotwell, his expression thoughtful. "Tell them we'll take the offer, but on one condition: we get to maintain full control over the Mars project. If we're going to change the course of humanity's future, we can't afford to compromise. We'll collaborate, but we lead." Shotwell raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by Musk's decisiveness. "I'll draft the response." "You're sure about this?" Musk nodded, a smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. "Absolutely. We're not just going to be a part of the future, we're going to create it. And I'm not sharing the reins on this one." As Musk left the SpaceX headquarters, the weight of his decision lingered in the back of his mind. It had been a bold move, one that could define the course of space exploration for decades to come. But as always, Musk wasn't deterred by the potential risks. He had made a habit of going against the grain, of challenging conventional wisdom, and he knew that in order to truly make a difference, sometimes you had to take the most difficult path. He stared out of the window of the car as it made its way down the road. The world outside was ever-changing, and the future was always just beyond the horizon. But Musk knew that each step he took brought him closer to a goal that was far greater than any individual accomplishment. He was building a future for humanity, one that would stand the test of time. "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," he murmured again, realizing how much those words had come to embody his entire philosophy. Every day was an opportunity to shape the future, to disrupt the status quo, to make the impossible possible. And Musk was just getting started. Musk had always thrived in the most challenging environments, but nothing tested his limits quite like the Mars mission. It wasn't just about rockets and technology, it was about pushing human potential beyond its known boundaries. As he sat in the control room at SpaceX, overlooking the latest iteration of the Starship rocket, he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. The moment had arrived for a real leap forward, and this time, the stakes were far higher than they had ever been. The test flight for the new Mars-bound Starship was just hours away, and the entire team at SpaceX was buzzing with energy. Musk paced back and forth in front of the large screens, eyes glued to the real-time data streaming in. Everything had to go perfectly. A failure at this stage could set back the mission by years. But Musk didn't fear failure, in fact, he welcomed it. He had always said that failure was a necessary part of success. If you weren't failing, you weren't pushing the boundaries hard enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. "This test might just change the future of space travel," Musk said to no one in particular, repeating the line he had used in countless interviews. His mind was split between the test and the monumental implications it carried. As the seconds ticked away, he couldn't help but wonder, if this test was successful, what would it mean for humanity? The first test flights of Starship had been spectacular failures. Explosions, technical malfunctions, and unanticipated challenges had plagued the early stages. But now, SpaceX had learned from each of those setbacks. The engineers, the scientists, the innovators, they had all come together to refine the design, improve the systems, and prepare for this pivotal moment. The countdown began. Musk felt a slight shift in the air, like electricity humming through the room. He took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving the screen. The rocket was now on the launch pad, ready for takeoff. Everything depended on this. 10. 9. 8. The countdown echoed through the control room. Musk's thoughts shifted to the people watching from around the world. They weren't just spectators, they were a part of something bigger. For the first time, humanity was looking to the stars with the possibility of actually reaching them. 3. 2. 1. Ignition. The sound of the engines roaring to life reverberated through the building as the rocket began its ascent. Musk felt a rush of adrenaline as the Starship rocket shot upward, the sky streaking with fiery light. For a few moments, the world felt like it had stopped. The enormity of the moment settled over him, and for a brief second, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what was happening. They were about to test the future of space travel, and this was just the beginning. But even as the rocket climbed higher, Musk knew that nothing was guaranteed. The higher the rocket climbed, the greater the risk. There was no way to predict how the rocket would respond as it left the atmosphere, no way to be sure that the next phase of the test would go smoothly. And then, suddenly, the rocket began to veer off course. Musk's heart skipped a beat. His eyes locked onto the screen, watching the telemetry data flicker and shift. The rocket wasn't supposed to be moving like this. It was supposed to be in a steady ascent. "Abort sequence," someone shouted from across the room. Musk immediately signaled for the team to execute the abort protocol, but it was too late. The rocket veered wildly to one side, and within seconds, a plume of smoke and fire erupted in the sky. It was the worst-case scenario, a failure on the world stage, a blow to the mission and to SpaceX's reputation. The silence in the control room was deafening. Musk stood motionless, staring at the screens, his mind racing. In just a few seconds, everything had unraveled. The rocket was gone. The mission was over, at least for now. He took a slow breath and glanced around the room. The engineers, who had worked tirelessly for months, now looked defeated. Their faces were a mixture of shock, disappointment, and disbelief. Musk could see the crushing weight of the failure settling in. But in that moment, something inside him clicked. Failure wasn't an option, it never was. He had learned long ago that the most significant advancements came not from avoiding failure but from embracing it, learning from it, and moving forward. SpaceX had made it this far by daring to fail. If they didn't try, they wouldn't have succeeded. Musk took a few steps toward the control center and addressed the room. "This is a setback, not the end. We learn from every failure. We adapt, we innovate, and we try again. There's no other way. This is just one chapter in a much longer story. We keep moving forward." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of the vision that Musk had instilled in SpaceX. The room was still somber, but his words seemed to reignite a spark in the engineers. There was work to be done, and the team knew it. Failure wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be conquered. "Get me a full analysis of what went wrong," Musk said, his voice steady. "We'll review the data, identify the weaknesses, and fix them. This mission isn't over. Not by a long shot." As the evening stretched on, Musk remained at SpaceX, poring over the data with his team. It was late, far later than he had expected, but that's how it always was. When you're building the future, there's no time to rest. Every failure was a lesson, and every setback was an opportunity to get better. As he sifted through the telemetry data, Musk realized something that would stick with him for the rest of his career: true innovation wasn't about how many times you succeeded. It was about how many times you got back up after falling down. This wasn't just a setback in the development of a rocket, it was a setback for humanity. The mission to Mars was more than just SpaceX's dream, it was the dream of everyone who believed in a future beyond Earth, who dared to believe that humanity could become a multiplanetary species. Musk wasn't ready to give up on that dream, not now, not ever. And as the clock ticked past midnight, he made a decision. The next test would happen sooner than anyone expected. They would make the necessary adjustments, fix the issues, and try again, faster, smarter, and stronger. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Let's keep pushing the limits of what's possible. The future is out there, and we're going to reach it. Musk muttered to himself again, the words more than just a mantra now. They were a declaration of intent. In that moment, as he prepared for the next phase of the journey, Elon Musk knew one thing for certain: the road to Mars was long, and it would be filled with obstacles, but it was a road he was determined to travel. The failures would continue, but so would the victories. He would keep moving forward, no matter what. As the sun began to rise over SpaceX's headquarters, Musk took a step back and looked out the window. The failure had stung, but the lessons were clear. This was just another battle in the war for the future. And no matter how many times he had to fight, Musk knew one thing: he would always keep moving forward. With that resolve in his heart, Musk turned back to his team. The next mission was already on the horizon. The morning after the Starship test failure, Musk was exhausted, but the adrenaline of the previous day's events had worn off, leaving him with a nagging sense of urgency. SpaceX's success wasn't just important to him, it was a beacon for the future of humanity. He had always said that his companies were in a race against time, and this setback had made that race even more urgent. It wasn't the failure itself that worried him, it was the potential loss of momentum. The world was watching, and SpaceX's reputation had taken a blow. The press would undoubtedly seize on this, questioning the viability of their ambitious plans. Musk knew that if he didn't act swiftly, the consequences could be catastrophic. He sat in his office at SpaceX, staring out the window as the bustling campus continued its daily rhythm outside. But in his mind, the world felt heavier than usual. This wasn't just about rockets, it was about something much larger. People needed hope, and he needed to prove that hope was still possible, no matter the odds. His phone buzzed. It was Gwynne Shotwell. "Elon, we need to talk," she said simply. He had a feeling he knew what the conversation was about, but he agreed to meet her in the conference room anyway. As he walked across the hall, his mind raced. He had spent the entire night reviewing the data, trying to pinpoint exactly what had gone wrong. The failure wasn't a simple miscalculation, it was a combination of factors that needed to be addressed immediately. Gwynne was already seated at the conference table, a grim look on her face. As the president of SpaceX, she had seen her fair share of highs and lows, but this was different. This was a make-or-break moment. "Elon, the test failure yesterday, it's a setback, and everyone knows it. The press is already calling it a catastrophe. We've already seen some of our investors pulling out, and a few key partners are starting to question our long-term viability," she said, her voice steady but clearly concerned. Musk took a seat across from her, folding his hands together. He knew exactly what she was getting at. "I know. But the reality is, we're not going to let this define us. We've been here before, and we've always bounced back stronger," Musk said, trying to project confidence, even though doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Shotwell looked at him, her brow furrowed. "Elon, I agree with you. But we're running out of time. We need to regain their trust, and fast. Our next steps are going to determine whether we come out of this stronger or weaker. We need a plan, and we need to act fast." Musk nodded. He had never been one to shy away from a challenge. "We will bounce back. We'll focus on transparency, fix the issues, and demonstrate that failure is just part of the process. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but I'm going to show them that we're committed to getting it right." Shotwell paused for a moment, then leaned forward. "What about the team? Many of them are frustrated, Elon. They're losing confidence. We need to address that. They look up to you for direction, and if we don't give them the right message, we'll risk losing their trust as well." Musk sighed, running his fingers through his hair. It was one thing to face external pressure, but the internal pressure was something else entirely. The SpaceX team had been through a lot, and they had come to depend on Musk's vision, his leadership. Now, he had to prove that he still believed in them, no matter the challenges. "We'll address it head-on. I'll talk to them personally, remind them of why we're here. We're not just building rockets, we're changing the future. That's why they joined, and that's why they'll stay. But we need to show them that we're still on track. We'll pull together, solve the issues, and prove to the world that this failure doesn't define us." Shotwell nodded, seemingly reassured by his words. "Good. We need that kind of resolve. Let's get to work on the plan. I'll work with the team to address the technical issues, but we need to make sure we communicate the right message to the public as well." The next day, Musk stood in front of a crowd of SpaceX engineers and technicians in a large conference room. The room was filled with the people who had made SpaceX what it was, people who had dedicated years of their lives to the mission of making humanity a multiplanetary species. The faces in the crowd were a mix of anxious, tired, and hopeful. Musk could feel the weight of their expectations. He cleared his throat, speaking directly to the group. I know yesterday was difficult. The failure was hard to swallow, and it stung for all of us. But we can't afford to let that defeat us. We've been here before, and we've always come back stronger. And we will again. He paused, scanning the faces in the room. He could see the doubt in some of their eyes, but also the determination in others. This was it, the moment where he needed to reconnect with his team, to remind them of the bigger picture. You all know the reason we're doing this. We're not here just to launch rockets. We're here to change the course of history. We're here to give humanity the chance to become a multiplanetary species. That's the mission, and we will get there. This failure does not erase the progress we've made. It's part of the process, part of the journey. Musk's voice grew stronger as he spoke. If you're in this room, it's because you believe in this vision. I'm not asking for blind faith. I'm asking for the same commitment and passion that I see in each of you every day. We will fix what went wrong. We will learn from this, and we will come out stronger. And we'll do it together. The room was quiet for a moment, and then, slowly, the murmurs began. The tension that had been palpable just minutes before started to lift. Musk had given them the message they needed to hear, that this setback was just a stepping stone towards something far greater. After his speech, Musk immediately rolled up his sleeves and got to work, sitting down with the engineers to dive deep into the data. He didn't just want to fix the issue, he wanted to understand it completely. If they were going to move forward, they needed to learn from their mistakes and address every detail with precision. He wasn't going to let this failure define them. As the hours passed, Musk worked alongside his team, reviewing every inch of the rocket's design and the test flight's telemetry. They uncovered several small issues, miscalculations in the fuel load, slight aerodynamic inefficiencies, and a few software glitches that had gone unnoticed during initial testing. None of these problems were insurmountable, but they had caused the failure. Now it was time to correct them. It was late by the time the team finalized their updated plan. They had a clear path forward, and Musk was ready to take action. As he stood to leave, he turned to Shotwell and gave a quiet nod. We're not finished, he said. We've got this. Shotwell smiled faintly. Let's get to work. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? After weeks of relentless work, Musk could finally sense the shift. SpaceX was no longer just recovering from failure, it was re-energized. The team had regained its confidence, the media's skeptical tone had started to soften, and even the investors were beginning to feel a renewed sense of optimism. It had been a long road, but the company was on the verge of something monumental. The rocket was ready for its next test flight. This time, there were no excuses. The team had addressed every flaw, refined every detail, and, most importantly, learned from the past. Musk wasn't just hopeful, he was certain. This launch would be the moment where they proved that failure was merely a stepping stone toward success. Musk sat in the command center, watching the final preparations unfold. The energy in the air was palpable, a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and determination. It was as if the entire facility was holding its breath, waiting for this next chapter to unfold. Gwynne Shotwell entered the room, walking straight toward him. Her expression was focused, but there was a hint of a smile. Everything's lined up, Elon. We're ready. Musk nodded, his eyes fixed on the massive screen displaying the countdown clock. Let's make sure it stays that way, he said quietly. As the minutes ticked away, Musk's thoughts drifted back to the larger picture. This wasn't just about testing a rocket, it was about creating a future where humanity wasn't confined to Earth. It was about making life multiplanetary, about building a legacy that would extend far beyond his own lifetime. He had always been driven by the belief that humanity's greatest challenge was survival, and space exploration was the answer. 5 minutes to launch, a voice crackled over the loudspeaker, snapping him back to the present. The team moved in sync, adjusting monitors, calibrating instruments, and ensuring everything was ready for the most crucial test of their careers. Musk's phone buzzed, breaking the intense silence. It was a text from his daughter, Nevada. "Good luck, Daddy. I believe in you." She had no idea how much that small message meant to him. His children were his grounding force in this whirlwind of work and ambition, and moments like these made him realize that all the effort, all the sacrifice, wasn't just for the future of SpaceX, it was for their future too. 1 minute, the voice echoed again. Musk took a deep breath. The pressure was immense, but this time, it was different. This wasn't just about proving something to the world, it was about proving something to himself. He had come so far, through every failure, every doubt. He knew that this launch would be a turning point, not just for SpaceX, but for the future of humanity itself. 10. 9. 8. The countdown continued. Each number felt like a beat in the heart of SpaceX's journey. 3. 2. 1. The room held its breath. And then, with a roar that rattled the walls, the rocket ignited. For a moment, there was nothing but a blinding flare of light and the overwhelming sound of thrust. Musk's heart raced as the rocket began its ascent, climbing steadily toward the sky. This was it. The future was unfolding right before his eyes. The rocket shot upward, gaining altitude with precision. Musk watched the telemetry data, his focus unwavering. The rocket was holding course, no signs of the erratic movement that had caused the previous failure. Each second that passed felt like a victory, and he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. "All systems go," a technician called out. "Good," Musk replied, his voice calm but intense. "Let's keep it that way." As the rocket passed through the atmosphere, Musk felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had made it this far. But they weren't finished yet. There was still a long way to go. The mission wasn't over, and the hardest part was still ahead. Hours later, after the rocket had completed its successful orbit and the data had been transmitted back to Earth, the SpaceX team gathered once more in the command center. The mood was electric. The launch had gone perfectly. Every system had performed as expected. There was no failure this time, only success. Musk stood at the front of the room, addressing the team. The once somber faces of his engineers were now beaming with pride. This was their victory, and Musk knew that the road to Mars had just become a little shorter. "Well done, everyone. This is a major milestone," he said, his voice filled with pride. "We've shown the world what SpaceX is capable of. But this is only the beginning. We've got a long way to go. The next phase, landing, will be the real challenge." The room erupted in applause. Musk allowed himself a moment to soak in the success, but his mind was already racing ahead to the next hurdle. This was just one step in a long journey, and he was determined to keep pushing forward. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. "We've made history today, but this is just the beginning of a new era," Musk said, his voice more confident than ever. Shotwell approached him as the applause died down. "What now, Elon?" Musk's gaze shifted back to the screen. "Now, we focus on perfecting the landing. The hardest part is still ahead of us. We're not just trying to reach space, we're trying to make space travel routine. And we're going to do it." As the day came to a close, Musk took a moment to reflect on everything that had led to this point. He had been tested more than he ever imagined. From the relentless failures to the long hours, the doubts and the skepticism, everything had built up to this moment. And yet, in many ways, this success felt like the beginning of something far bigger. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his father, Elon Musk, "Proud of you, son. You've done it." Musk smiled to himself, the warmth of the message grounding him for a moment. His relationship with his father had always been complicated, but moments like this made him realize how far he had come, and how far he still had to go. He stepped outside onto the balcony of the SpaceX headquarters, looking out at the sprawling campus. In the distance, he could see the faint outline of the launch pad where it had all started. The stars above seemed a little closer now. They had reached orbit, now, they had to land. And once they landed, the mission to Mars would be within reach. Musk turned back to the team, who were still celebrating their victory. He had always known that the road to Mars would be filled with challenges, but now, for the first time in a long while, he felt that the impossible was suddenly within reach. The future was here. And SpaceX was going to lead the way. The aftermath of the successful launch had been filled with euphoria. The media coverage, which had once been dominated by skepticism and doubt, was now glowing with praise. SpaceX achieves breakthrough success, the headlines screamed. Musk and his team had silenced the critics, for now. But Musk knew this was merely a prelude. SpaceX's true challenge was about to begin. The successful launch was just the first step, and the hardest part was still ahead, landing the Starship. The goal was simple but audacious: land the rocket back on Earth in a controlled, reusable manner. But as Musk had always known, simple didn't always mean easy. Musk sat in his office, looking over the latest data from the rocket's orbit. His mind was focused, sharp. He had always been driven by this single idea, that humanity's future depended on making space travel routine. To get there, they needed the next breakthrough, landing. We need to nail this. It's not just about landing a rocket, it's about changing the future, Musk thought to himself as he stared at the screen. SpaceX had already landed smaller rockets before, but this was different. This wasn't just about a single-stage booster returning to the launch pad, it was about landing an entire spacecraft capable of carrying humans to Mars. The margin for error was slim, and the stakes were higher than ever. "Elon, we're ready to start the final preparations for the landing test," Gwynne Shotwell's voice crackled over the intercom, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Are you ready?" Musk stood up from his chair and walked toward the door. "Let's do it." The next day, SpaceX's headquarters was buzzing with activity. Teams were monitoring telemetry, calibrating systems, and preparing the ground crew for the upcoming test. Every eye in the room was fixed on the large screens that displayed the countdown and the rocket's current status. Musk joined Shotwell and other senior engineers in the command center, the air thick with anticipation. The room was silent except for the low hum of the equipment. 5 minutes to launch, the voice from the control room echoed through the loudspeaker, signaling the start of the final phase of preparations. Everyone's attention intensified as the clock ticked down. Musk had been through many launches by now, but the weight of this one was different. The entire future of SpaceX, not to mention his dream of colonizing Mars, depended on this landing. The team had worked tirelessly to ensure that the rocket could safely return to Earth after completing its mission. They had designed an intricate system of engines, flaps, and sensors to control the descent. It was a delicate balancing act, and one that had to be executed flawlessly. 1 minute, the voice continued. Musk's pulse quickened. He could feel the pressure mounting, but he didn't show it. He knew his team was prepared, but there was always that lingering doubt, because when it came to space, failure was often the default. 30 seconds. He looked at Shotwell, who gave him a reassuring nod. They were ready. The team was ready. 10. 9. 8. The countdown continued. 3. 2. 1. A deafening roar filled the room as the engines ignited, and the Starship began its descent from orbit. It was an awe-inspiring sight. The rocket's flame lit up the screen, and everyone in the room held their breath. The next few minutes would determine whether SpaceX had truly cracked the code of reusable space travel. As the rocket descended, the telemetry data was a blur of numbers and graphs. Musk's eyes darted between screens, watching for any signs of irregularity. Every second felt like an eternity as the rocket fell faster and faster through the atmosphere. The Starship was equipped with a set of large grid fins, designed to control its descent and steer it toward the landing site. The engines had to reignite at the right moment, slowing the rocket's fall just enough to ensure a soft landing. Too early, and the rocket would miss the target; too late, and it would crash into the ground. The rocket passed through the upper atmosphere, its heat shield glowing red from the friction. Musk's heart raced, his focus unshakable. He had seen rockets explode before, he knew how quickly things could go wrong. But this time, everything was different. This time, they had it. Altitude 5,000 feet, one of the engineers called out. Preparing for engine reignition, another voice added. Musk watched the data stream, his mind working faster than ever before. The rocket was approaching the landing site, the familiar landing pad where it had all started. He felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. They were about to make history. Engine reignition in 3, 2, 1. The engines fired, and the rocket began to slow. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfect. The rocket was coming in fast, but it was on target. Musk held his breath. This was the moment of truth. And then, as if on cue, the rocket began to wobble. "Control system error," one of the engineers shouted. Musk's mind went into overdrive. The rocket was still descending at a high rate, and it wasn't perfectly aligned with the landing pad. The grid fins were fighting against the wind, but the rocket's balance was off. Come on, Musk muttered under his breath. The engines roared louder, fighting the momentum, but the rocket continued to drift. They were running out of time. There was no turning back. Suddenly, the rocket began to tilt more sharply. Musk's eyes widened. The landing was slipping away. "Abort! Abort!" shouted Gwyn Shotwell. Musk's mind raced. Everything they had worked for, all the progress, might be gone in a matter of seconds. But then, something incredible happened. At the last possible moment, the engines kicked in at full force. The rocket, barely a few hundred feet from the ground, stabilized in mid-air, correcting its trajectory. It was a miraculous save. The fans of the engines blasted downward, and the rocket slowly began to sink, its landing gear stretching toward the pad below. The final seconds felt like hours. The rocket touched down with a soft thud, its engines roaring until they shut off, the dust billowing around the landing site. And then, silence. It was done. For a moment, no one moved. The entire room was frozen in disbelief. And then, slowly, the command center erupted into applause. People hugged, cheered, and high-fived. It had worked. They had done it. SpaceX had successfully landed the Starship. Musk sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. The weight of the achievement was finally sinking in. They had just made history. This wasn't just a triumph for SpaceX, it was a triumph for the entire space industry. And it was the first step toward a future where space travel was routine. Shotwell walked over to Musk, her face a mix of relief and joy. "We did it, Elon. We really did it." Musk smiled, but there was no time to celebrate. This is just the beginning. Mars is next. The celebration that followed the successful landing was short-lived. While the team at SpaceX basked in the glory of their monumental achievement, Musk's thoughts never strayed far from the future. The successful landing was a key milestone, but it was only the beginning of something much bigger. Mars was still out of reach, but now, for the first time, it felt tangible. Musk knew what he had to do next. He had to prepare for the first human mission to Mars. The question wasn't if they could do it, it was when. And the answer, Musk had decided, was sooner than anyone could imagine. SpaceX had the technology, the resources, and the drive to make Mars a reality. But what they needed was a clear, unwavering vision. And that vision had to be more than just about rockets and engines, it had to be about the future of humanity. Musk had already begun assembling a team of experts. Engineers, scientists, astronauts, all working under the banner of a single mission, to get humanity to Mars. SpaceX was no longer just a company, it was the beating heart of a new frontier. The launch of Starship was a vital first step, but there was still much to be done. Musk's first move was to overhaul the design of the Starship. It was already a feat of engineering, but Musk was never satisfied with good enough. If SpaceX was going to send humans to Mars, the rocket needed to be even more robust, more efficient, and capable of carrying life support systems for extended missions. One of the main challenges was ensuring that the spacecraft could support a crew for the long journey. The flight to Mars would take months, and the crew would need food, water, and oxygen for the entire trip. They would need living quarters, power sources, and waste management systems, all of which needed to be integrated into the Starship's design. Musk spent long hours at SpaceX's headquarters, working with his team to refine the specifications. There were heated discussions about fuel, propulsion systems, and how to reduce the weight of the spacecraft without compromising its structural integrity. Every detail mattered, lives would depend on it. We're not just designing a spacecraft. We're designing a lifeboat for humanity, Musk often said, his voice carrying a weight that left no room for complacency. This wasn't just another rocket. This was their ticket to becoming a multiplanetary species. Musk also pushed for rapid development of the infrastructure needed for Mars colonization. SpaceX was already working on developing the technology for sustainable life on Mars, including solar-powered habitats, water extraction systems, and even the beginnings of a Martian agricultural project. Musk's plan wasn't just to land on Mars, it was to create a sustainable colony capable of surviving long after the initial landers had left. But building the necessary technology was only one piece of the puzzle. There was also the matter of selecting the astronauts who would make the first voyage. This, Musk knew, would be one of the most challenging aspects of the mission. Musk announced that SpaceX would be recruiting a group of elite astronauts for the Mars mission. He wanted to assemble a team that wasn't just highly trained, but also deeply committed to the vision of becoming a multiplanetary species. The astronauts needed to be prepared for the grueling physical and psychological demands of the mission. A massive recruitment drive began, and astronauts from all over the world applied to join the mission. There were medical doctors, engineers, pilots, and geologists, each one a specialist in their field. Musk's criteria for selection went beyond their resumes, though. He wanted people who were driven by the same vision, who understood the magnitude of what they were undertaking. After a lengthy and rigorous selection process, the team was chosen. It consisted of 6 individuals, 4 men and 2 women, each with a specific skill set that would be vital to the mission. Among them were Dr. Lisa Chang, a medical doctor with expertise in space medicine, and Captain James Hargrave, an experienced pilot with years of space travel under his belt. There was also Dr. Rafael Garcia, a geologist who would help identify potential resources on Mars, and Dr. Emily Tan, a biologist whose focus was on growing food in a controlled environment. Musk addressed the new team in a private meeting, his voice full of determination. "We're not just going to Mars to land a rocket," he said. "We're going to create a future. A future where humanity can thrive on another planet. You will be the first to step on Mars, but your mission goes beyond just exploration. You're laying the foundation for the future of our species. You will be remembered as pioneers." Training began in earnest. The astronauts underwent intense simulations designed to prepare them for the harsh conditions of Mars. They trained in extreme isolation, mimicking the psychological and physical challenges of the long journey. They spent months in simulators that recreated the Martian surface, practicing everything from landing procedures to growing crops in a Martian greenhouse. But the most difficult part of the training wasn't the technical challenges, it was the isolation. For months, the astronauts were cut off from the outside world, living in confined spaces and enduring the stresses of long-duration space travel. Musk wanted them to understand that this mission wasn't just about technology, it was about human endurance, adaptability, and resilience. The isolation simulations were grueling. The astronauts were subjected to psychological tests, pushed to their limits to ensure they could handle the extreme stress of the mission. Musk watched closely, but he never interfered. He trusted the team he had assembled. They were the best humanity had to offer, and they were going to Mars. "We can't afford any mistakes," Musk would often remind them. "This is about survival, not just exploration. We need to be ready for everything." The astronauts, in turn, took the training seriously. They knew that failure was not an option. The stakes had never been higher. They weren't just preparing for a scientific mission, they were preparing to lay the first stone in the foundation of a new civilization. As the training progressed, the world began to take notice. Media outlets all over the globe were covering the mission, and the excitement surrounding SpaceX's Mars initiative reached a fever pitch. Musk had always known that space exploration captured the public's imagination, but this was different. This wasn't just about reaching the moon or building a space station, it was about the future of the human race. Governments, corporations, and universities began offering their support, and Musk's dream of a multiplanetary civilization was gaining momentum. The public was rallying behind the mission, eager to see humanity take its first steps toward a new frontier. Musk was fielding more requests for interviews, attending meetings with world leaders, and managing SpaceX's ever-expanding reach. But through it all, he never lost sight of the ultimate goal. He wasn't just building a company, he was building the future. As the preparations for the Mars mission continued, one thing became clear: SpaceX wasn't just on a mission to reach Mars, they were on a mission to change the course of human history. The countdown to the first crewed mission to Mars was about to begin. Months of planning, designing, testing, and training had led to this moment. SpaceX had defied the odds, revolutionizing space travel, and now it was ready for the next phase. The launch wasn't just a milestone for SpaceX, it was a defining moment for humanity. It represented the first serious step toward making life multiplanetary. Musk stood in the control room, surrounded by engineers, astronauts, and military officials. The Starship stood on the launch pad outside, gleaming under the bright lights of the night. The rocket was fully fueled, its massive engines ready for ignition. 5 minutes to launch, came the voice of the mission commander over the intercom, breaking the silence. Musk nodded, his face calm but his mind racing. He had never been one for anxiety, but today was different. The significance of this mission weighed heavily on him, as it did on the astronauts who would soon board the Starship. The crew had been prepped, their hearts and minds set on their mission. Captain James Hargrave, Dr. Lisa Chang, Dr. Rafael Garcia, Dr. Emily Tan, and 2 other astronauts, Dr. Helen Zhang, a specialist in aerospace engineering, and Dr. Miguel Rivera, an expert in Martian geology, had undergone the most intensive training imaginable. The 6 astronauts were prepared to face the challenges of the Martian landscape and the grueling journey ahead. "Everyone ready?" Musk asked, his voice steady but carrying a tone of quiet determination. Shotwell, standing next to him, gave a small, tight smile. "Ready as we'll ever be." The launch had been delayed several times due to technical issues, weather conditions, and minor malfunctions, but today, everything seemed to be in order. The data checks had been completed, the rocket was in top condition, and the crew was mentally prepared. Nothing would stop them now. 10 seconds, the commander's voice rang out. Everyone in the room held their breath. Musk's fingers twitched at his sides as he stared at the massive rocket, towering against the night sky. This wasn't just about sending a rocket into space. This was about launching humanity into the future. The countdown was a blur, and then, without warning, the engines roared to life. The Starship was a massive machine, its power resonating in every bone and fiber of Musk's being. The rocket lifted off the ground with an explosive force, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The launch pad trembled as the spacecraft ascended, cutting through the atmosphere like a knife through butter. Inside the cockpit, the astronauts were strapped into their seats, their faces calm but resolute. This was their moment. Every second of training, every sacrifice they had made, led them to this journey. There was no turning back now. The launch was flawless. The engines burned bright as the rocket soared toward the heavens, the roar of the engines growing faint as they ascended through the clouds and into the blackness of space. The team had made it through the initial hurdle. Now, it was all about the journey ahead. Musk watched the rocket climb higher and higher on the screens in the control room. There was a small moment of euphoria, a feeling of immense satisfaction, but it was fleeting. He knew the road ahead was fraught with peril. There would be no shortage of challenges as they headed toward Mars. And the unknown, that vast expanse of space, loomed ever larger. "Velocity is steady," one of the engineers reported. "Everything is on course." Musk nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still to come. They had achieved something incredible, but the real challenge would be landing on Mars, and sustaining life there. The next few months would test the limits of human endurance, ingenuity, and resilience. As the starship continued its journey through space, the astronauts settled into their routine. They had trained for this, months of simulations had prepared them for the isolation, the confinement, and the physical toll that the journey would take. They were more than just astronauts, they were pioneers, embarking on a mission that would define the future of humanity. The first few days were calm. The astronauts spent their time performing routine checks, monitoring life support systems, and conducting scientific experiments. Dr. Chang and Dr. Tan worked together to ensure that the hydroponic systems, designed to grow food on Mars, were functioning properly. They would need to perfect the techniques of growing food in space if their mission to Mars was going to succeed in the long term. Meanwhile, Dr. Garcia and Dr. Rivera worked on geological studies. The data they collected from the spacecraft's sensors would provide valuable insights into the Martian landscape, helping them understand the terrain they would soon be exploring. They knew that the success of the mission would rely heavily on their ability to locate resources on the red planet, water, minerals, and energy. The isolation was intense, but it wasn't the most difficult part of the journey. The most difficult part was the uncertainty. How would they land? What challenges would they face on the Martian surface? How would they survive in an environment that was as hostile as it was alien? As the days passed, the astronauts settled into a rhythm. They took turns monitoring systems, exercising, and eating the nutrient-rich food that would sustain them during their long journey. But even as they went about their daily tasks, they couldn't ignore the enormous weight of the mission. They were heading to Mars, yes, but they were also heading into the unknown. And the unknown was a terrifying place to be. After weeks of travel, the astronauts had their first glimpse of Mars. The red planet appeared as a faint, distant dot in the vastness of space, slowly growing larger as they approached. It was a sight that none of them would ever forget, the moment when the impossible became real. Musk stood in the control room, staring at the monitor. The Martian surface was now within their reach. Soon, the crew would be preparing for the landing. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "We're getting close," one of the engineers said, their voice filled with awe. "We're going to make it." Musk didn't respond immediately. He was too absorbed in the view of Mars, which had begun to dominate the screen. It was beautiful, in its own way. And terrifying. The surface looked barren, desolate, a stark reminder of how much work lay ahead. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Musk finally said, his voice steady. "We've got a job to do." As the starship neared Mars, the crew began their final preparations for landing. The atmosphere was thin, which meant that the landing would be tricky. The rocket had to slow its descent without burning up in the atmosphere. It was a delicate operation that required perfect execution. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The astronauts ran through landing simulations, double-checking everything. They reviewed the mission parameters, the landing sequence, and the procedures for exiting the spacecraft once they touched down. The Martian surface was harsh, and there was no room for error. Then, finally, the day came. The countdown to landing had begun. The entire crew held their breath as they descended into Mars' atmosphere. They had made it this far, now, they had to land. The descent was turbulent, but the starship's advanced technology kept it on track. The ground crew back on Earth watched nervously, their eyes fixed on the screens. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the engines fired. The starship hovered briefly above the surface of Mars, and then, with a soft thud, it touched down. The mission to Mars had been successful. Musk exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the moment. They had done it. Humanity had just taken its first step toward becoming a multiplanetary species. The starship stood firm on the Martian soil, its engines sputtering softly as they powered down. The mission was far from over, but for the astronauts aboard, this was the moment that would define their place in history. They had arrived. They had reached Mars. Outside the window, the Martian landscape stretched out in every direction. It was barren and inhospitable, but there was something breathtaking about the red dust and distant mountains. The terrain was stark and unwelcoming, yet somehow beautiful in its silence. This was where humanity would begin its new chapter, a new frontier, thousands of miles away from Earth. Inside the spacecraft, the astronauts sat still for a moment, processing what had just happened. They had done it. They had landed on Mars. Captain James Hargrave, the mission commander, was the first to speak. "Well, folks," he said, his voice carrying a hint of awe, "we've made history. But now, the real work begins." There was a collective exhale in the cabin. It was one of relief but also of anticipation. The team had undergone years of training, countless simulations, and months of isolation to prepare for this moment. Now, standing on the edge of human history, they had to prove that they could survive and thrive on the Martian surface. Musk watched the live feed from the control room at SpaceX's headquarters. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he saw the astronauts don their spacesuits, preparing to step out of the starship for the first time. "Are they ready?" Shotwell asked, standing beside him. Musk nodded. "They've been ready for years. It's not about the rocket anymore, it's about the people." The air in the control room was thick with tension as the astronauts began their preparations. Captain Hargrave was the first to reach the hatch, his fingers moving with practiced precision. He turned to the crew, giving them a silent nod before opening the hatch. The airlock hissed as the pressure adjusted. The moment had come. As the hatch opened, the harsh, thin Martian atmosphere spilled in, a stark reminder of the planet's inhospitable nature. Yet, the astronauts stepped forward with determination. Captain Hargrave led the way. With slow, deliberate steps, he descended the ramp and touched the red dust of Mars with his boot. The first human footprints on the Martian surface. A moment that would echo throughout history. The mission control room fell silent. Musk stared at the feed, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. They had made it. This wasn't just a victory for SpaceX or even for the astronauts, it was a victory for humanity. "We are the first," Captain Hargrave's voice came through the radio, the static breaking up slightly as he spoke. "The first humans to step on Mars. This is only the beginning." There was a brief moment of silence on the broadcast, but then the crew's collective cheers came through the comms. They had done it. Humanity had officially arrived on Mars. The astronauts had planned for months about what to do immediately after landing. The primary objective was to establish the first Martian base, a temporary habitat where they would live, work, and study. This would be their home for the next several months as they conducted experiments, mapped the terrain, and tested life support systems for long-term survival. The team unloaded the necessary equipment from the starship, including the inflatable habitats, solar arrays, and equipment for conducting geological studies. Dr. Rafael Garcia, the geologist, took charge of setting up the equipment to take soil samples from the surface, while Dr. Emily Tan and Dr. Lisa Chang began setting up the hydroponic system, their main hope for growing food on Mars. Dr. Helen Zhang worked on setting up the communication systems, ensuring that they could stay in contact with Earth. The physical strain of being on Mars was already evident. The low gravity, just 38% that of Earth's, made every movement feel different. It was as though the astronauts were walking on another world, a world that seemed simultaneously familiar and alien. Despite the challenges, the crew worked tirelessly, setting up their new home with a combination of precision and awe. They knew the importance of their mission. They were laying the groundwork for future missions, and more importantly, they were showing the world that human life could survive on another planet. As night fell on Mars, the astronauts retreated to their habitat. The Martian sky stretched above them in shades of deep red and black, and the stars seemed to burn brighter than they ever had on Earth. The silence was overwhelming, the kind of silence that was both comforting and unsettling. It was the silence of an untouched world. Inside their habitat, the crew sat together, eating freeze-dried food and talking about the day. Despite the exhaustion, there was a sense of camaraderie. They were in this together. The journey, the mission, the risks, all of it had brought them closer. Captain Hargrave leaned back in his seat, gazing out at the distant Martian horizon. "We've made history today," he said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "But we can't forget why we're here. We're not just here to make a mark on a planet. We're here because humanity's future depends on it." Dr. Lisa Chang nodded in agreement. "We have to make this work. Not just for us, but for future generations." There was a sense of unity that transcended the isolation they felt. They knew they were living in the shadow of something much larger than themselves. They were working to make history, something that could change the course of humanity. The first night on Mars wasn't without its challenges. The Martian atmosphere was thin and hostile, and the temperature fluctuations between day and night were extreme. During the day, temperatures could reach up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees Celsius, but at night, they could plummet to a bone-chilling -100 degrees Fahrenheit, -73 degrees Celsius. This made it crucial for the crew to maintain the integrity of their habitat and life support systems. The astronauts spent the following days carefully monitoring the systems, checking for any failures or malfunctions. Despite the meticulous planning, Mars had a way of throwing unexpected challenges their way. On the third day, the crew discovered a slight fault in the water extraction system. The system was designed to extract water from the Martian atmosphere, but it was running slower than expected. Dr. Tan and Dr. Chang worked together to troubleshoot the issue, but it would take time to get everything functioning properly again. Meanwhile, Dr. Garcia and Dr. Rivera had begun mapping the surrounding terrain. The Martian surface was rocky and unpredictable, making it difficult to find suitable locations for future expansion. But they were optimistic. The data they collected would be crucial for future colonization efforts. As the days turned into weeks, the crew settled into a rhythm. They faced challenges, but they overcame them, relying on their training and their unity to push through. Every day was a step closer to realizing Musk's vision of a multiplanetary civilization. And every day, they made history. The first steps on Mars, the first tests of survival, the first crops grown, they were all monumental achievements. But more than that, they were proof that humanity could overcome the odds, break through the limits, and venture into the unknown. At night, as the astronauts sat together, gazing out at the Martian horizon, there was a sense of purpose in the air. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew that they were part of something bigger than themselves. They were pioneers. They were the first. And they were just getting started. The days following the crew's successful establishment of the Martian base were filled with steady progress. Each challenge faced was met with determination and ingenuity. The hydroponic systems were starting to yield their first crops, the solar arrays were functioning at full capacity, and the living quarters were stable. Life on Mars, while harsh, was becoming manageable. However, that sense of control was about to shatter. It happened on the 12th day, just as the crew was beginning to settle into a rhythm. Dr. Helen Zhang, who was in charge of maintaining the communications array, was the first to notice something strange. The frequency of the incoming signals from Earth began to glitch. At first, it was a slight distortion, barely noticeable. But then the interference grew stronger. Patches of static started to consume the feeds. "We're having some interference," Helen reported over the comms. It's like someone's trying to jam the signal. Musk, who was tracking the team's progress from Earth, immediately froze in place. Can you isolate the source of the interference? He asked, his tone suddenly serious. We're working on it, Helen replied. But it doesn't make sense. We've tested the equipment multiple times before launch, and nothing is wrong. The disturbance wasn't just irritating, it was concerning. Mars was, for all its mysteries, an isolated world. The connection to Earth, the lifeline that kept them tethered to home, had always been a source of comfort. If something was wrong with the communication systems now, it posed a real problem. They couldn't afford to lose that vital connection, not with the mission still in its infancy. By the following day, the issue had escalated. The interference wasn't just confined to communications, it seemed to affect the navigation systems too. The crew's instruments were malfunctioning sporadically. The rover that they had sent out to explore the nearby terrain had experienced a complete loss of signal for several minutes, causing a brief but terrifying panic among the team. Something's wrong, Dr. Garcia said, his voice low and tense. It's more than just interference. There's a pattern to it. Musk, still in constant communication with the team from Earth, felt the growing sense of unease. He knew that Mars, despite all of its promises, was an environment where human error, equipment failure, or unforeseen issues could turn deadly in an instant. But this felt different. It wasn't just the technology that was malfunctioning, it was the sense of vulnerability that began to settle over them. As they sat around a table in their habitat, staring at the readings on the display screen, an eerie silence filled the room. Dr. Lisa Chung spoke up. We've been monitoring this interference for hours, and it's not just random. The signal is too precise. It's almost as if, it's coming from somewhere. Captain Hargrave nodded, his expression hardening. You mean someone's intentionally jamming us? It's possible, Dr. Chung replied, her brow furrowed in thought. It could be interference from natural Martian phenomena, but I don't think that's the case. The crew exchanged worried glances. They had all trained for every possible contingency, equipment malfunctions, life support failures, and even hostile Martian conditions. But no one had trained for someone, or something, on Mars actively trying to disrupt their mission. As the hours ticked by, the crew's unease grew. They ran diagnostics on all their equipment and systems, but nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary. Yet the disturbances continued. It became harder and harder to ignore the growing suspicion in their minds. Was there someone, or something, on Mars trying to interfere with their work? In the days leading up to the first landings, Musk had often spoken about the limitless potential of Mars. A fresh start for humanity, the promise of new discoveries, and the possibility of uncovering the planet's secrets. But now, the optimism of that vision was beginning to erode. Was it possible that Mars wasn't the barren wasteland they had thought it was? Could there be life, intelligent life, that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for the arrival of humans to disrupt their peace? Captain Hargrave was the first to voice the thought that everyone had been quietly avoiding. Could it be, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Could there be something alive here? Something that doesn't want us here? Dr. Tan, ever the scientist, quickly dismissed the idea. No evidence of any life form has ever been found on Mars. Not microbial, not anything. It's highly unlikely. But even as she said the words, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had been studying Mars for years, and she had never once considered the possibility that there was something, or someone, on the planet. And yet, the interference couldn't be ignored. The odd readings, the malfunctioning systems, it wasn't normal. It wasn't just a glitch. As night fell on Mars, the crew huddled together again to discuss their next move. The tension was palpable, like a storm hanging over them, ready to break. The fear of the unknown weighed on them like an invisible hand. We can't keep waiting for this to fix itself, Captain Hargrave finally said. We need to investigate. We need to find out what's really going on here. The crew nodded in agreement. There was no choice. They couldn't afford to sit back and hope the problem would go away. If Mars was hiding something, whether it was an unknown natural phenomenon or something more sinister, they had to confront it. The mission was too important to let fear or uncertainty derail their progress. Dr. Garcia and Dr. Rivera volunteered to take the rover out again, this time to the source of the interference. They would scan the area and investigate the geological features that had been causing the disturbances. The other members of the crew would stay behind, monitoring the situation from the base and preparing for any eventualities. As the rover drove away, the crew on the base held their breath. The tension in the room was unbearable. They watched the screen as the rover moved further and further from the base, its sensors scanning the surrounding terrain. Then, suddenly, a massive reading popped up on the screen. Dr. Rivera's voice came through the comms, crackling with static. "Captain, you need to see this. There's something here, something buried beneath the surface." Hargrave's eyes widened. "What do you mean something buried? Is it artificial?" "I don't know," Dr. Rivera replied, his voice thick with disbelief. "But this doesn't look natural. We found a structure." For a long moment, no one spoke. The words hung in the air like an unspoken truth. A structure. On Mars. Buried beneath the red soil. The crew on the base scrambled to analyze the data from the rover, but there was no mistaking it. Something was out there. Something ancient. Something that had been hidden beneath the surface of Mars for who knew how long. Musk stared at the live feed from Mars, his mind racing. He had always believed in the possibility of the unknown, of discovering new worlds, of uncovering the mysteries of the universe. But this was something beyond what anyone had anticipated. They had come to Mars to make history, to prove that humanity could survive on another planet. But what if they were not the first to arrive? The crew had come to Mars to conquer the unknown. Now, they were about to face an entirely new kind of challenge. The planet was no longer just an uninhabited world. It was something else. Something alive. The days following the discovery were tense, filled with urgency and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. The moment Dr. Rivera had reported the discovery of the structure, the crew had gone into overdrive, analyzing every bit of data that had been sent back from the rover's sensors. The readings were unlike anything they had ever seen. There was something beneath the surface of Mars, something artificial. But what was it? And who, or what, had left it there? The team spent the next few hours carefully reviewing the data, trying to make sense of the readings. The structure appeared to be partially buried, its shape angular and precise, unlike anything naturally occurring on the Martian surface. It was undeniably man-made, or at least it looked that way. But how could that be possible? They had come to Mars with the assumption that the planet had been barren, untouched by any intelligent life for billions of years. Yet now, they had proof that something had once thrived here, or, perhaps, something still did. Musk watched the data flood in, his mind racing. He was no stranger to breakthroughs, but this was different. This was the kind of discovery that could rewrite everything humanity knew about Mars. Back at the base, Captain Hargrave and his team sat together in the habitat, staring at the data in stunned silence. The implications of what they had just discovered were enormous, but the question remained, what should they do next? "We can't just leave it there," Hargrave said, his voice tense. "We need to investigate. We need to get to the source of this, now." Dr. Helen Zhang, who had been in charge of monitoring the communications systems, turned to the others. "But if this structure is as ancient as it seems, we have no idea what we're dealing with. We could be putting ourselves in danger." The team exchanged uneasy looks. There was no question that what lay beneath the Martian soil could hold vital information, but it could also be something dangerous. They had no idea what they were truly facing. After a brief moment of deliberation, Hargrave made the decision. "We have no choice," he said, his tone firm. "We came here to explore, to discover. And this is bigger than anything we could have ever imagined. We need to send a team to the site. We'll be cautious, but we have to go. The crew knew that this journey would be risky. The rover was their only way to get to the site, and it was still functioning only intermittently. But it was their best shot. Dr. Garcia and Dr. Rivera were the first to volunteer to make the trip, as they had been the ones to discover the anomaly. Dr. Tan, who had been working with the hydroponic systems, also volunteered, eager to see what secrets lay buried beneath the Martian soil. Hargrave knew that he had to be careful about who he sent on the mission. Every move they made on Mars was a calculated risk. The danger of the unknown had never been more real. With a deep breath, Hargrave addressed the team. "You're our best option. I know it's dangerous, but you're the ones who can do this. We need you to get as close as possible, collect data, and report back immediately. If anything feels off, pull back. We're not taking chances here." The crew nodded in agreement. They all knew the gravity of the situation, but the desire to uncover the truth was too powerful to ignore. They were on the edge of something extraordinary, and they couldn't back down now. The rover, despite its previous malfunction, was once again operational, albeit somewhat sluggish. Dr. Garcia, Dr. Tan, and Dr. Rivera climbed inside, sealed their helmets, and prepared for the descent. "Let's do this," Dr. Garcia muttered as he pressed the button to initiate the rover's journey. The rover hummed to life, slowly rolling forward, its wheels crunching against the red dust of Mars. The journey would take several hours, but the team remained in constant communication with the base. Every few minutes, they would send updates on their progress. As they neared the location of the structure, the Martian landscape seemed to become even more desolate. The ground was cracked, the air thin, and the sky a dull, lifeless red. It was the perfect setting for an alien discovery, a place that could have easily hidden the secrets of an ancient civilization. Then, the rover's sensors detected something. "We're close," Dr. Rivera said. His voice was steady, but there was a trace of excitement. "I'm seeing something unusual on the sensor grid. This is it." The rover slowed to a stop as they neared the location. The dust settled, and the metallic structure began to come into view. It was partially submerged in the sand, its sharp edges partially obscured by debris, but it was unmistakable. It was too geometric, too precise to be a natural formation. This was man-made, or at least constructed by an intelligent force. As the rover's camera zoomed in, the structure became clearer. It was a large, angular object, resembling a series of interconnected chambers. Some parts of it were covered in what looked like markings, hieroglyphs or symbols, but none of the crew recognized the writing. The patterns were unlike anything they had ever seen before. "I'm not sure what we're looking at here," Dr. Tan said, her voice filled with awe. "This looks like a structure, maybe a building, but its design is unlike anything we've encountered. It's like nothing from Earth, and it's definitely not from our time." Dr. Rivera turned to Dr. Garcia. "We need to scan it. I'll start by taking core samples of the material. See if we can identify what this is made of." They moved closer to the structure, and as they did, a strange feeling began to creep over them. The air seemed to hum with an energy that they couldn't explain, and the temperature around the structure felt slightly warmer than the surrounding area. It was subtle but noticeable. "I'm not liking this," Dr. Tan said, her voice tight with tension. "There's something off about this place. It doesn't feel right." Before anyone could respond, the rover's instruments emitted a sudden, sharp beep. The screen flashed with a new reading, an anomaly that hadn't been detected before. "What is that?" Dr. Garcia asked, staring at the screen. A long pause followed before Dr. Rivera spoke again, his voice strained. "It's a heat signature," he said slowly, coming from inside the structure. The crew froze. The heat signature was undeniable. Something inside the structure was alive, whether it was the result of some Martian phenomenon or something far more sinister, the team didn't know. But the discovery now raised 1,000 new questions. "We need to go inside," Hargrave said, his voice steady but tense over the comms. "We have no idea what that heat signature means, but we can't leave it unexplored." The crew debated for several minutes, weighing the risks. If there was something alive inside the structure, or if it was an unknown technology, it could be dangerous. But the lure of discovery was too great. Dr. Garcia, Dr. Rivera, and Dr. Tan gathered their courage. They knew they couldn't turn back now. They were about to unlock a secret that could change everything. Steeling themselves, they prepared to enter the structure, ready to face whatever lay within. With a final glance at the base, they opened the hatch to the rover, grabbing their tools, and made their way to the entrance of the mysterious structure. The air around them seemed to hum even louder now, as if the very planet was holding its breath. They stepped forward, their footsteps silent on the dusty surface of Mars. What they were about to uncover could change everything. The Martian landscape was silent. The three astronauts, Dr. Garcia, Dr. Tan, and Dr. Rivera, stood at the threshold of the alien structure, their hearts pounding. Their helmets reflected the cold light of Mars, the harsh terrain stretching out endlessly behind them. The eerie hum of the structure filled the air, an unsettling presence that seemed to vibrate deep within their bones. They were about to cross a boundary no human had ever crossed before. Dr. Rivera led the way, cautiously approaching the entrance. The door, or what appeared to be a door, was large and metallic, its surface covered in strange markings and symbols. The material was smooth, almost sleek, and there was a faint glow emanating from it, something subtle but impossible to ignore. The closer they got, the more pronounced the energy seemed to become. "Stay sharp," Captain Hargrave's voice crackled over their comms. "We don't know what we're dealing with here. Proceed with caution." "We'll be careful," Dr. Garcia replied, adjusting the grip on his tool belt. His breath came fast inside his helmet, but he knew better than to show fear. Fear could cloud their judgment, and this moment was far too critical. As Rivera approached the door, it seemed to sense his presence. The symbols on the surface began to shimmer, almost as if alive, reacting to their proximity. There was no physical mechanism, no visible handles or switches, just the eerie, organic movement of the door itself. Then, with a quiet hiss, the door slid open. A cold rush of air poured from within, and the trio stood frozen for a moment, taking in the enormity of what lay before them. The interior of the structure was vast, far larger than it had appeared from the outside. The walls were sleek, made of the same dark material as the exterior, and glowing patterns ran across them in intricate lines. The space was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It was a stark contrast to the dry, dusty exterior of Mars, as though they had stepped into another world altogether. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Tan whispered, stepping forward cautiously. "It's like it was built to last forever." The interior was not just a hollow space, but it seemed to be designed, crafted, even. Smooth curves and angles formed a chamber that expanded into several rooms, each connected by narrow hallways. The light inside was dim but constant, emanating from an unknown source in the ceiling. And though there was no visible power source, the structure felt alive, pulsing with energy. "Check the sensors," Dr. Rivera instructed, his voice tight with focus. "We need to know what we're dealing with." The team moved further into the structure, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they advanced, they noticed strange objects embedded in the walls, geometric shapes, patterns, and even what appeared to be advanced machinery, though it was far more alien than anything they had ever seen. It was like walking through a museum of technology from a civilization that had never been known to humankind. "We need to be extremely careful," Dr. Garcia said, his voice low but urgent. "Whatever this place is, it's not just a ruin. It's still functional." "But how? How can it still be operational after who knows how long?" Dr. Tan glanced over at the strange markings on the walls. They looked almost like a form of writing, but their meanings were unclear. She reached out to touch one of the symbols, her gloves brushing the surface. Almost immediately, the symbol shifted, its glow intensifying, and a deep hum resonated through the room. The walls trembled slightly. "Don't touch them," Dr. Rivera warned sharply, stepping forward. "We don't know what activating these symbols might do. This could be some kind of ancient security system." The tremor subsided, but the air in the chamber grew heavier, as if the structure was reacting to their presence. "Let's keep moving," Dr. Rivera said, trying to mask the rising anxiety in his voice. "We need to find out what's at the center of all this." The heat signature was coming from deeper inside. They continued to explore, their hearts racing with anticipation. Each new room they entered seemed more complex than the last, with strange devices that pulsed with light and energy. The structure seemed to defy all logic, they couldn't understand how it had been built or who had built it. The walls, though ancient, appeared flawless, as though they had been created yesterday, not millennia ago. After what seemed like an eternity of exploration, the team finally reached the central chamber. This room was unlike any they had encountered before. It was massive, with a high ceiling that stretched upward, covered in an intricate lattice of glowing lines. In the center of the room stood a massive object, a core, perhaps, or a power source, shimmering with blue energy. It pulsed rhythmically, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. "That's it," Dr. Tan breathed, awe in her voice. "That's the source of the energy. It's some kind of power source, possibly the heart of the structure." Dr. Garcia stepped forward, cautious but drawn toward it. The core seemed to beckon him. The energy it emitted was both unsettling and mesmerizing. He reached out his hand, but before he could make contact, the ground beneath them shook. "What the hell?" Dr. Rivera shouted, steadying himself against the wall as it cracked slightly from the force. The hum from the core grew louder, more intense, and the walls of the room seemed to ripple. The lights flickered, and the very air seemed to warp. "We need to get out of here," Dr. Tan shouted, her voice panicked. But it was too late. With a sudden, blinding flash, the core surged, and a shockwave of energy radiated out, knocking the team off their feet. They were thrown back, tumbling to the ground as the room was engulfed in a surge of light and sound. For a moment, everything went white, and then, silence. When the light faded, the team found themselves lying on the cold ground of the chamber, stunned and disoriented. Their suits had absorbed most of the shock, but the impact had still been enough to send waves of pain through their bodies. Groggily, they rose to their feet, their heads spinning. The room had changed. The walls, once smooth and unmarred, now showed signs of wear and damage. The once steady pulse of the core had stopped. "What the hell just happened?" Dr. Rivera murmured, shaking his head. I don't know," Dr. Garcia replied, still reeling from the blast. "But whatever that was, it wasn't a natural phenomenon. That core, it activated something. We need to leave, now." They stumbled toward the exit, their minds racing with what had just transpired. As they neared the doorway, the walls seemed to pulse again, and the eerie symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, as if reacting to their presence. "We need to report this back to the base," Dr. Tan said breathlessly, her voice filled with urgency. This is far beyond anything we've ever imagined. We have to warn them." But as they turned to leave, the ground beneath them shifted once more. This time, it wasn't just the walls that trembled. The very foundation of the structure seemed to be awakening. The lights flickered once again, and the hum grew louder. "Get to the rover, now!" Dr. Rivera shouted. The team broke into a run, their boots pounding against the ground, as the structure seemed to come alive around them. Whatever had been dormant for centuries, or perhaps millennia, was now stirring. The discovery of the structure had opened a door to something far more dangerous than they could have anticipated. And the worst part? They had no idea who, or what, had just awakened. The surface of Mars seemed eerily calm, a stark contrast to the chaos inside the ancient structure. The team's frantic rush toward the rover felt almost surreal, as though they were racing against something unseen. The lights flickered again, casting long, haunting shadows as the walls seemed to tremble with an energy of their own. "Move!" Dr. Rivera shouted, pushing forward. "We can't wait around to see what happens next. We need to get back to the rover and report this." Before he could finish, the ground beneath them gave another violent tremor, this time far stronger than the previous ones. The air seemed to ripple with an invisible force, and the walls around them began to shake violently. It was as if the very foundation of the structure was coming to life, responding to their intrusion. "What's happening?" Dr. Tan asked, her voice filled with both panic and disbelief. The team had almost reached the exit when, without warning, a massive roar erupted from deep within the structure. It wasn't an animal's cry, nor was it anything that sounded remotely natural. It was mechanical, reverberating through the walls, an unnatural, metallic scream that sent chills down their spines. "Get to the rover. Now!" Dr. Garcia shouted, pushing Dr. Tan and Dr. Rivera ahead of him. The ground was shaking more intensely now. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, causing the trio to duck as they ran for cover. The entire structure seemed to be alive, as though it had woken up from a centuries-long slumber. Whatever had been dormant inside, it was now awake, and it was angry. The exit of the structure finally came into view, but it wasn't enough. Before they could reach it, a dark shadow swept across the doorway, blocking their path. The light in the room flickered violently, casting the shape of something massive and towering in the doorway. For a moment it was unclear what they were seeing, whether it was part of the structure's design or something far more menacing. But as the shape began to materialize, the trio froze in horror. It was a figure, tall, dark, and seemingly mechanical in nature. It was covered in layers of armor-like plating, with strange symbols etched into the surface. There were no visible eyes, but the figure seemed to be staring right at them, an overwhelming, cold presence that sent a wave of dread over them. "What the hell is that?" Dr. Tan whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Rivera's breath caught in his throat. "I don't know, but it's not something we're prepared to face." The figure took a slow step forward, its movements smooth but deliberate. The hum of the structure grew louder, almost as if it was reacting to the figure's presence. "We have to move, now!" Dr. Garcia shouted, breaking the trance. Without thinking, the team sprinted toward the exit, but as they neared the door, the figure lunged forward, blocking their only means of escape. It moved faster than they could react, and before they could make another move, the ground beneath them quaked again. But this time, the quake didn't stop. The entire structure seemed to groan as if it was buckling under the force of some unseen power. A screeching sound echoed from deep within the walls, and a strange blue light began to emanate from every crack and crevice. The walls pulsed with energy, and the figure in front of them stood motionless, seemingly in control of the chaos. Dr. Rivera turned to Dr. Garcia and Dr. Tan, his voice urgent. "Get to the rover. I'll hold it off." "What?" Dr. Garcia shouted, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No. I'll buy you enough time to escape." Rivera interrupted, his voice calm but filled with determination. "Go." The team hesitated for a split second, then turned and ran, their legs pumping as fast as they could move. Behind them, Rivera glanced back, pulling out a small device from his belt. It was an emergency flare, a tool meant to signal for backup. He activated it, sending a bright, blinding light shooting toward the ceiling of the chamber. The flare arced through the air, momentarily illuminating the figure and the pulsing walls, before it disappeared into the distance. The figure stood completely still as the light faded. It didn't chase after them. It didn't need to. As the trio sprinted back toward the rover, the ground continued to shake with increasing frequency. They could hear the shrill hum of the structure's machinery echoing in their helmets, the sensation of being pursued looming over them like a dark cloud. They were close now. Only a few more meters to go. "We're almost there." Dr. Tan shouted, breathless. Her legs burned from the sprint, but the urgency in her voice drove them forward. But just as they reached the rover, a loud, crashing sound erupted behind them, followed by a screech of metal. The doorway to the structure was sealed off by a large metallic object, a barrier, perhaps, or some kind of automated defense mechanism that had activated with their intrusion. The door was blocked. They were trapped. No! Dr. Garcia shouted, slamming his fist against the side of the rover in frustration. We're trapped in here. Dr. Tan stumbled toward the rover, her face pale. It's not over. It's not over yet, is it? The answer came in the form of another tremor, this one far more violent. The Martian surface beneath their feet seemed to shudder with such intensity that the rover itself buckled. A loud metallic groan filled the air as the structure shook, responding to something far more powerful than before. Wait! Dr. Garcia suddenly said, turning to face the back of the rover. I saw something. There's an emergency hatch. In desperation, the trio ran around to the back of the rover, their hands shaking as they scrambled to open the hatch. They had no time to waste. The structure, the mysterious figure, and the strange force inside, it was all too much to process. But they couldn't stop now. They had to escape. With a final heave, the hatch opened, and the team scrambled inside, sealing the door behind them. The rover was their last chance to survive. They were going to make it out, even if it meant everything they had worked for, everything they had discovered, was left behind. As Dr. Garcia ignited the rover's engines, the ground continued to rumble. The rover shot forward, leaving the entrance of the structure behind. They sped away, watching as the walls of the alien facility seemed to pulse once more, as though reaching out to them. But they were gone. For now. As they drove across the Martian surface, the trio was silent, each of them lost in their thoughts. What had they just witnessed? The structure, the figure, the energy, everything seemed like a dream. A nightmare, perhaps. But no matter how hard they tried to rationalize it, one thing was clear, they had uncovered something that humanity wasn't ready for. Dr. Rivera's voice cut through the silence. I think we've just opened Pandora's box. Dr. Tan turned to him, her eyes wide with shock. What do you mean? I mean, Rivera said slowly, his voice grim, whatever we triggered inside that structure, it wasn't just dormant technology. It was alive. And whatever it is, it's been waiting. Waiting for us. The team exchanged nervous glances, the weight of their discovery settling in. We've awoken something, Dr. Garcia said quietly. And it might not just be confined to that structure anymore. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there. And it's not done with us. The red dust of Mars whipped past the rover as it sped across the barren landscape, the rhythmic hum of the engines drowning out the deafening silence inside. Dr. Garcia gripped the controls with white knuckles, his focus unwavering, but his mind raced. His thoughts were fragmented, every part of him still processing the horror they had just experienced. They had barely escaped the ancient structure, what if they hadn't? What if they had been too late? Dr. Tan sat beside him, her eyes glued to the monitors, watching the rover's trajectory. She wasn't much better off. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she tapped commands into the dashboard. Behind them, Dr. Rivera stared out the rover's rear window, his face etched with a mixture of anger and confusion. He couldn't stop replaying the encounter in his mind, the figure, the explosion of energy, the feeling that something far larger was at play than they could have ever imagined. The structure wasn't just an old ruin, it was a piece of something far bigger, something active, something sentient. Whatever it was, it had been waiting for them. We need to report this, Dr. Tan said, her voice tight with urgency. We have to let command know what we've discovered. They'll need to send backup. We can't handle this alone. Dr. Garcia nodded but didn't speak. He knew the severity of the situation. But his mind kept drifting back to that moment, the moment when everything had shifted inside the structure. The blinding light, the hum, the eerie presence of the figure. It was as if they had awakened something that had been dormant for centuries, something that had been waiting for them. We don't even know what we've found, Dr. Rivera said, his voice shaking with frustration. How do we explain any of this to command? How do we even begin to tell them about that thing? He slammed his fist against the back of the seat. We were so close. It almost got us, and we don't even know what it was or why it was there. We know one thing, Dr. Garcia said quietly, his voice steady. It's not a good sign. Whatever it is, it's far more advanced than anything we've encountered. The rover bounced over a rocky patch of Martian terrain, the sudden jolt pulling them out of their reverie. Dr. Garcia's mind kept drifting back to the symbols on the walls, the pulsing energy, the way everything seemed to react to their presence. What was that energy? Dr. Tan asked, her voice breaking through the thick silence. I've never felt anything like it. It was like it was alive, but not. It wasn't like anything we've ever studied before. Dr. Garcia looked over at her, his brow furrowed. The core in the structure, it wasn't just powering the place. It felt like it was feeding on us, on our energy. Dr. Rivera turned to face them, his expression growing darker. What if we weren't supposed to find it? What if we weren't meant to know about it? We still don't know enough, Dr. Garcia said, his voice low but certain. But whatever it is, we need to find out before it finds us. As the rover made its way toward the outpost, the trio's anxiety continued to mount. The silence inside was suffocating. No one had the energy to speak anymore, as if each of them were lost in their own personal thoughts, grappling with the same terrifying truth. They had just uncovered something monumental, but there was a cost. Something had woken up, and whatever it wasn't friendly. Finally, they arrived at the outpost, a small, efficient station where the team had set up their base of operations. The outpost was relatively quiet when they arrived, but as the rover touched down, a warning light began to flash on the main comm screen. This isn't good, Dr. Tan murmured as she turned to Dr. Garcia, who was already reaching for the controls. The message that appeared on the screen was brief but clear. Abort mission, return to Earth immediately. You are no longer cleared for operations on Mars. Danger level, severe. Repeat, abort. Return to Earth. A cold chill ran down Dr. Garcia's spine as he read the message aloud. Abort mission? His voice was hoarse. Why now? We just got here, we've barely begun to scratch the surface. Dr. Rivera's face paled. This is from command. Something's going on, they're pulling us out. They don't even know what we've discovered, Dr. Tan said, her eyes narrowing in frustration. How can they give us a warning like this without understanding the situation? It's not a warning, Dr. Garcia said quietly, staring at the screen. It's a command. The trio stood in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the situation. Why had command issued such a drastic order? Was it because they had made contact with something? Or had they discovered something that had triggered a larger response on Earth? We can't just leave it like this, Dr. Rivera finally said, his voice hardening. We've just uncovered something that could change everything. We're not going back without answers. But we have no idea what we're dealing with, Dr. Tan countered, her voice shaky but resolute. Whatever's out there, it's not natural. It could be dangerous. We don't even understand its purpose. Dr. Garcia stood still for a moment, his eyes focused on the now blinking command to return to Earth. His mind raced, but one thought kept overriding all others: they couldn't turn back. Not when they were so close to uncovering the truth. If we go back now, they'll never understand. We'll be pulled off Mars with nothing, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. We need to gather more information. We need to find out what that structure is, what it was built for. Dr. Rivera looked at him, his expression softening. You're saying we stay? Dr. Garcia nodded slowly. We stay. But we have to move quickly. We don't have much time before command decides we've done enough damage. But how do we even begin? Dr. Tan asked. We're dealing with something that's far beyond our technology. It could be hostile. We don't even know what it wants. We can't just sit around and wait for answers to come from Earth, Dr. Rivera said. We need to be proactive. We need to understand what we're up against. The weight of their decision settled on them all. There was no going back. Whatever lay ahead would be perilous, but they were in this now. The danger was real, but so was the chance for a discovery that could change the course of humanity forever. We'll need a plan, Dr. Garcia said. First, we need to study the data we've gathered. Every symbol, every piece of the structure we can analyze, we have to break it down. There might be a way to learn how it works, or at least how it thinks. But if it's waiting for us, Dr. Tan began, her voice trailing off in uncertainty. It's waiting for something, Dr. Garcia finished. And we'll be ready for it. The team spent the next several hours going over the data they had collected from the structure. The rover was rigged with enough equipment to run basic analysis, but it wasn't designed for long-term research. The real work had to be done at the outpost. They worked late into the night, but the answers remained elusive. The symbols in the structure were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Their meanings were buried in a layer of complexity that made decoding them impossible with their limited tools. The sense of urgency, however, didn't fade. The command to abort was still blinking on the monitor, an unrelenting reminder that time was running out. The team needed to make a decision, whether to stay and risk everything or return and abandon their search. But Dr. Garcia was resolute. They would find out what had been uncovered. They couldn't let the knowledge slip through their fingers. We need to get back to the structure, he finally said, looking each of them in the eye. This is bigger than any of us could have imagined. The team nodded, understanding the magnitude of the risk they were about to take. Whatever awaited them on Mars, it was far from over. They had only just begun to peel back the layers of the mystery. The heart of the unknown was calling them. And they had no choice but to answer. The room was still. The oppressive silence that hung in the air felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating every breath. The hum of the alien structure had stopped, leaving nothing but the echo of their own movements. Dr. Garcia, Dr. Rivera, and Dr. Tan stood in the midst of the room, staring at the dimly pulsating core in front of them. The figure that had once guarded it was gone, disintegrated, reduced to nothing in a moment of unexplainable destruction. Dr. Tan was the first to speak, her voice trembling. We did this? How? I don't know, Dr. Garcia replied, his voice hoarse as he took a cautious step forward, eyes locked on the now silent core. But whatever it was, we triggered it. And whatever we've unleashed. We've only just begun to see it, Dr. Rivera finished, his voice cold with realization. His eyes scanned the room, wary of any further surprises. This isn't over. It was just waiting for the right moment. The three of them stood there in stunned silence. In a way, it felt like they had crossed an invisible threshold. The structure they had discovered was more than an ancient ruin, it was a living, breathing thing. The power of the core wasn't just energy, it was a force that had been lying dormant for eons, waiting for the right conditions to awaken. And they had awakened it. Dr. Garcia's mind raced. What had they triggered? What had they unleashed onto Mars? And, more importantly, what would happen next? We need to get back to Earth, Dr. Tan said, her voice quiet but firm. Now. Before it's too late. Dr. Garcia nodded, the weight of the situation settling in. Agreed. But we need to gather the data. Everything. We can't leave anything behind. The team quickly moved into action, collecting samples from the core and the surrounding area. The alien symbols on the walls, which had once seemed like an unsolvable puzzle, now appeared to be shifting before their eyes, the patterns and structures rearranging as if alive. Dr. Rivera was furiously taking readings, trying to make sense of the chaotic energy that filled the air. These readings are off the charts, he muttered. This isn't just energy, it's something else. A form of communication. It's trying to tell us something. But as they worked, the structure began to shake. The ground beneath them trembled as a low rumbling sound echoed from deep within. The core, which had been silent moments before, began to pulse again, its light growing brighter, stronger. "Something's coming," Dr. Tan said, her voice rising in panic. Before anyone could respond, a deep, guttural sound filled the room. It wasn't a voice, not a human one, but a sound like machinery grinding, mixed with an inhuman hum. The walls seemed to warp and twist, the very air vibrating with the force of something powerful, and something angry. Dr. Garcia's eyes widened. "We've made a grave mistake." Suddenly, the core erupted with energy. A shockwave of light blasted outward, knocking the team off their feet. The room spun around them as the walls cracked and fractured. The blue light from the core turned blinding, engulfing everything in its path. The structure groaned under the pressure, as if it were alive and trying to shake off an intruder. "Get out of here. Now!" Dr. Garcia shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. He scrambled to his feet, pulling Dr. Tan and Dr. Rivera up with him. They ran toward the exit, but the doors had closed. The walls had sealed them inside. The room shook again, and the air grew heavy, like something was suffocating them. "We're trapped!" Dr. Tan yelled, panic rising in her voice. Dr. Garcia banged his fists against the now locked doors. "No! This can't be happening!" Suddenly, there was a sound, a low, rumbling growl, like the roar of something immense, something mechanical. The very walls of the structure seemed to pulse with life. And then they saw it. A shadow moved in the corner of the room, emerging from the darkness. A massive, armored figure, not unlike the one they had encountered before, but this one was different. It was larger, more menacing, and its eyes glowed with an unholy light. The figure spoke, its voice a harsh, guttural growl that vibrated the air around them. "You have disturbed the balance. The reckoning has begun." Dr. Garcia's heart raced. This was not just a being. It was a machine, part of the ancient defense system that had been built to guard the core. And now, it was awakening. But what did it mean for them? Was this a warning? Or had they just activated something far worse? "We need to leave. Now!" Dr. Rivera shouted, grabbing for the equipment at their feet. But before they could move, the figure lunged forward, blocking their only exit. Its metallic body glinted ominously, and the light from its eyes cast an eerie glow on the team. The air around them crackled with static energy, as if the very atmosphere had been charged by the figure's presence. "You are the ones who have awoken the sleeping gods. You will face the consequences of your actions." The team froze, their minds racing to comprehend the implications of what they had done. They had uncovered a secret that had been buried for centuries, a secret too powerful to be understood by human minds. Dr. Tan's voice trembled. "What do you want from us? What are we supposed to do?" The figure did not respond immediately. Instead, it stepped forward, its heavy footsteps echoing through the chamber. As it moved closer, its body began to shift, morphing into something more familiar, a humanoid shape, but with mechanical limbs and a face that seemed both ancient and new, as if it had been forged from the very core itself. "I am the last of my kind," it said, its voice now clearer but still full of menace. "I am the Sentinel. The keeper of the core. And now, you must pay the price for your intrusion." Dr. Garcia's mind raced. They had unwittingly activated the core, and in doing so, they had triggered an ancient system, one that was designed to protect something far more powerful than they could have imagined. The reckoning wasn't just an event. It was a test, a trial meant to weed out the unworthy. But they had no way of knowing that. All they had wanted was to uncover the truth. And now, the truth was unraveling in front of them, faster than they could comprehend. The figure raised its hand, and the ground beneath them trembled once more. The walls of the structure began to shift, closing in around them. They were running out of time. They had no choice but to confront the consequences of their actions. "We need to find a way out," Dr. Garcia said, his voice low, filled with determination. The team looked at each other, knowing that this was their last chance. They had uncovered the most significant discovery in human history, but now they were paying the price for it. And the reckoning had only just begun. This is where the story ends, as the team faces the consequences of their actions, unaware of the true scope of the ancient power they have awakened. They must now confront the alien force that has been watching them, guarding the core, and begin their fight for survival. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?